Now, you can't find living dinosaurs nowadays, which is a good thing, mostly, but you can still meet some creatures that might have gone to lunch with them. The frilled shark, for example, is a living fossil that comes from a family of sharks that have been around for about 80 million years. One of the coolest things about it is its long, eel-like body that can grow as long as 6 feet. It has 6 pairs of gills on its throat, which help the frilled shark breathe in the deep, cold ocean where there isn't much oxygen. The shark can move very quickly, like a snake, to catch its prey when it least expects it. Little frilled sharks take an exceptionally long time to grow, up to 3.5 years, which is one of the longest times for any animal with a backbone. The Chinese giant salamander is another living fossil that can tell you what was going on Earth around 170 million years ago. Now, when I say tell, I really mean it, as it can make sounds like hisses, whistles, and barks, and even a noise that sounds like a crying kid. The biggest Chinese salamander found so far weighed 130 pounds, as heavy as 2 Dalmatians, and was almost 6 feet long. Giant salamanders like to be alone. Hey, I want to be alone. And will chase away other salamanders from their space, except when it's time to start a family. During the day, they hide and sleep under rocks. They can make a special substance from their skin that keeps predators away. Now, gharials are reptiles that have been around for about 38 million years. They live in India and Nepal in slow-moving, muddy rivers. Sadly, there are very few gharials left in the wild, less than 100. These creatures can't control their body temperature, so they need to sunbathe to get warm or cool down in the water if they get too hot. Their eyes are close together and face forward, which helps them see in 3 dimensions and judge distances more accurately. Gharials also have a transparent third eyelid that protects their eyes when they're underwater. They have over 100 sharp teeth, but they can't chew their food. Instead, they use their strong jaws to grab prey and then, swallow it whole. The alligator gar is a fish that has a family history of more than 100 million years. It still has some cool features from ancient times, like being able to breathe both air and water. It also has a special spiral-shaped intestine, like a shark. The alligator gar is one of the biggest and heaviest fish in North America. Just like an alligator, it has a long body and snout, plus a row of sharp teeth. But instead of legs, the gar has fins to help it swim underwater. The tuatara isn't a lizard as you might think, and isn't a dinosaur either. This New Zealand resident is one of the most unique animals in the world. Scientists love studying tuataras because they can help us understand how today's lizards and snakes evolved. One of the coolest things about the tuatara is its third eye, called a parietal eye, on its head. It has its own lens, retina, and a nerve that connects it to the brain. Scientists think it might help the tuatara know when it's light or dark outside and absorb sunlight to make vitamin D or help them keep their body temperature exactly right. Tuataras can live an extraordinarily long time, up to 100 years. Cassowaries are the youngsters on our list, as they've been around for only 60 million years. They have some things in common with dinosaurs, like their 3-toed feet and how they breathe. Cassowaries love to eat fruit, lots and lots of fruit. This love of fruit helps the rainforest, because when cassowaries eat the fruit, their bodies don't harm the seeds inside. As they move around the forest, they spread these seeds, you can guess how, with their own natural fertilizer, helping new plants grow. Cassowaries are big birds, about 6 feet tall and weigh over 100 pounds. They have a special claw on each foot that is 5 inches long, and they can use it to kick real fast. If they feel threatened, they can charge, kick, and even jump on someone. They can also leap up to 5 feet in the air. So, the best thing to do is stay far, far away from where they live. The order Notostraca is a group of crustaceans that you may know as tadpole shrimp or shield shrimps. These animals have been around for about 360 million years. They have a wide, flat shell that covers their head, and they have a pair of eyes on top. These creatures can be found all over the world in different kinds of water, like freshwater, brackish water, and even salty pools. They can also look different depending on where they live. Notostraccans aren't picky eaters and can snack on pretty much anything, from plants to small animals and other shrimps. Some of them are considered pests in places like California rice paddies because they stir up the mud, which blocks sunlight from reaching the young rice plants. Sturgeons are some of the largest fish species on the planet. They live only in the cool waters of the northern hemisphere and never travel below the equator. Even though they are huge, sturgeons don't have teeth. They eat by sucking food off the bottom of rivers, gulfs, lakes, and oceans. Scientists believe that sturgeons came from a group of fish that first appeared around 419 million years ago, long before dinosaurs even existed. Their ancestors survived a big extinction event that wiped out 90% of all species and went on to become the largest fish in many rivers in North America and Eurasia. Sturgeons can live up to 100 years old or even older. Female sturgeons can lay up to 3 million eggs at a time, but not all of the eggs eventually turn into real fish. Our next hero, the Pacific lamprey, has successfully lived through at least 4 mass extinctions. Its ancient ancestors evolved over 450 million years ago. These creatures have cartilage instead of bones and a third eye, which is a special light-sensing organ on top of their heads. Instead of a regular jaw, they have a mouth surrounded by teeth. They latch onto prey and sup up body fluids like real underwater vampires. And although he wasn't living underwater, the story goes that King Henry I of England might have lost his life because of a lamprey. The English monarch loved this fish so much that he defied doctors' orders to stop eating its flesh. He got sick every time he'd have it, but the lack of bones and the unusual taste made the royal fall in love with it. As a result, he got some scary symptoms from eating lamprey and eventually passed away. Can you say clueless? The elephant fish, also called the Australian ghost shark, has been on Earth for around 400 million years. Even though they're related to sharks, they aren't actually sharks. Instead of bones, their bodies are made entirely of cartilage. These fish have a special shiny tissue in their eyes that can make their eyes look like they change color from yellow to green. Elephant fish can be pretty tough and will fight back if they feel threatened. They like to be alone and usually don't hang out with other fish. Horseshoe crabs also deserve the title of survival champs, as they've been around even before dinosaurs, since 450 million years ago. 4 species are still roaming the ocean from Maine all the way to Mexico. Horseshoe crabs are more like spiders than ticks than they are like real crabs. They have 9 eyes, plus extra light sensors near their tails, so they can see really well. They breathe underwater using flap-like gills near their belly, and sometimes they use these gills to swim upside down. Every spring, when the tide is high, these creatures come up to the beach at night to mate and lay their eggs, and you can see hundreds of thousands of them.
In 1952, an Air Force plane called C-124 Globemaster II crashed into a big mountain while flying from Washington to Alaska. Sadly, everyone on board, 52 people in total, didn't make it. The bad weather at the time made it hard to find the crash site, and even later, any attempts to locate it failed. But in 2012, a helicopter crew doing a training mission spotted the pieces of the crashed plane on a glacier called Colony Glacier in Alaska. They started looking for more pieces and confirmed it was indeed the missing plane. Since then, every summer for about a decade, different military groups have been helping in an operation called Colony Glacier. They've managed to identify 40 out of the 52 people whose lives were lost in the crash. The soldiers taking part in this mission take their promise seriously to never leave a fallen comrade behind. They believe it's their duty to bring back those who didn't make it. Another discovery comes from the Alps. In 1991, some hikers exploring the picturesque Alps stumbled upon a human body. It was half frozen in ice at the top of a mountain pass between Italy and Austria. At first, the local police thought it might be a mountaineering accident, but in a few weeks, archaeologists started claiming that this guy might have lived more than 5,000 years ago. They eventually gave the frozen fellow the nickname Ötzi. He was named after the nearby Ötztal Valley. He's become quite famous as the oldest ice mummy on record. Ötzi's frozen state might not be as unique as we thought, and that's where things get really cool. Archaeologists have another theory. See, at first, everyone was convinced that Ötzi marked the start of a cooler period because he had been frozen in the ice without any interruptions since he had lost his life. Yet, over the past few decades, glaciers and ice patches worldwide have been melting away like ice cream on a hot summer day. Not just Ötzi, but other ancient relics like bodies, hunting gear, horse droppings, and even ancient skis started to appear. So, archaeologists say there are similar sites. They found quite a few, and they all fit perfectly into this growing field of glacial archaeology. It seems like as the world warms up, it will show even more ancient secrets from the deep freeze. Moving on to another amazing discovery. In 2018, William Taylor and Nick Jarman were exploring the snowy slopes of Mongolia's Altai Mountains. They found an ancient treasure trove hidden in the ice. Inside the trove, they found a well-preserved 3,000-year-old arrow shaft adorned with ochre markings. It was in pristine condition, a rarity for organic items that old. They found other items too, like a bronze arrowhead with bits of animal sinew still attached. All of these relics had been untouched for hundreds of years, since they had been locked in the ice. In Mongolia, rising temperatures have melted ice patches that remained frozen for centuries. Similar discoveries have been made in the Yukon, US, Italy, Siberia, and Norway. Thousands of sites have been identified. Yet, scientists are racing against time to document and preserve these artifacts before they're lost forever. The study of these artifacts challenges the definition of these environments as wildernesses and shows how indigenous people coexisted with nature there. Sometimes people find simple items too, as simple as a sandal. This one, discovered on one of central Norway's mountain passes, indicates that people used this route roughly 1,700 years ago. This suggests that there was less snow and ice in that area back then. The sandal, dating back to around 300 BCE, resembles Roman sandals of that era. Again, in Norway, hunters found an iron sword high up on a mountain, more than 5,250 feet above sea level. There's no nearby burial site, and it's puzzling why someone would have a sword in such a remote location. Archaeologists speculate that the owner might have become lost. Then, in 2011, unusual objects resembling giant slingshots began to emerge as the ice melted. Radiocarbon dating suggests that this particular object was crafted around 400 BCE. It measures over 3 feet long and has knife cuts. Those puzzled archaeologists until one team member recognized them as tang, or pliers, used to secure loads on sleds when transporting hay or leaving for animal food. People in the area used hay sleds with pliers until the 1950s, when tractors became more common. Now, let's get back in time to thousands of years ago. We can easily do that by looking at this woolly mammoth. This creature looks a bit like a cherished but slightly worn-out toy. This ancient giant, whose heyday was 39,000 years ago, is the best preserved mammoth ever found. Even its signature shaggy hair is surprisingly well preserved, having been trapped in glacial ice until its recent discovery in Siberia. This remarkable animal is stepping into the limelight in Yokohama, Japan. Scientists are running tests that might bring this extinct species back to life. When they stumbled upon this female mammoth, they uncovered a hidden treasure, a sample of her blood preserved beneath the ice. So they believed this ancient blood could hold the key to resurrecting the mammoth. They also found well-preserved muscle tissue. She was between 50 and 60 years old when she met her icy fate. The discovery of mammoth blood has reignited debates about the ethics of bringing back extinct creatures, like in Jurassic Park. Their ambitious plan is to implant an egg into a living elephant for a 22-month pregnancy, hoping that at least one living mammoth cell might survive. Hop on, we're going to the French Alps. We are at a spot not far from where an Air India plane tragically crashed 46 years ago. We're accompanied by a diligent mountain rescuer and his neighbor. They went to this area after a bunch of tourists had noticed a strange-looking thingy on a glacier. It was a bag. The Indian embassy in Paris got wind of it, and it was all set on getting that bag. What makes it kinda cool is that it had diplomatic mail and Ministry of External Affairs written on it. The Air India flight was on its way from Mumbai to New York when it took a nosedive in January 1966. It took 117 people on board down with it. Guess what else was inside the bag besides the soaked diplomatic mail? It had a stack of old Indian newspapers. So, alongside those, they also found bits of the plane's cabin, a lone shoe, and a bunch of cables. Totally unexpected treasures on that mountain. During the summer of 2013, scientists stumbled upon a message left behind by a geologist named Walker, who had placed it there 44 years before. That message sort of served as the man's last testament. He passed away just a month after hiding the bottle in the rocks on the island. The content of the message was quite astounding. In 1959, Walker had measured the distance from those very stones to the glacier's edge, and it clocked in at a mere 167 feet. By 2013, that distance had ballooned to 400 feet. Researchers are convinced that this stark contrast between the two measurements underscores the consequences of ongoing global warming. Imagine the melting ice in Norway's mountains as a time machine revealing a treasure trove. Nearly 800 Viking artifacts tucked away for over 1,000 years have been unearthed. They give us a peek into the bustling trade networks of the Viking era and the critical role of the mountain passes in this ancient commerce. Among the finds are leather shoes, cozy woolen mittens, stylish tunics, feathered arrowheads, horseshoes, walking sticks, and kitchen gadgets from the Viking chef's toolkit. There are even Viking pack horse souvenirs. These artifacts provide us with insights into ancient travel habits and the peak times when those paths were bustling with activity, and give us a glimpse into the lives of adventurers.
Baby T-Rex was adorable. There, I said it. Hard to imagine those two words in the same sentence, but come on, even Big Bad T-Rex didn't pop out of its shell all big, scary, and fully grown. In its first few months on Earth, Baby T was a cute, fluffy, turkey-sized ball of fuzz. It was kind of like a weird-looking bird coming out of an oversized egg. Not enough food, dangerous surroundings, asteroids, Poor baby T's were so helpless and weak, only about half of them made it to their first birthday party. Scientists think their fuzz was there to keep them warm when they were still small and vulnerable. Plus, it helped them camouflage and stay safe. Baby T's didn't have big, sharp teeth, yet. So, they mostly munched on smaller reptiles and insects. Baby T's grew up pretty fast. They put on up to 6 pounds a day. Hey, I've done that. No, not really, just felt like it. The weirdest fact about them? When they were little, their arms looked totally normal compared to their bodies. But by the time they were full grown, their parents were super famous. Plastered all over t-shirts, that would be a T-Rex t-shirt, movies, and the greatest Halloween costume ever, in my humble opinion. But the T-Rex we know and love didn't really exist. First of all, speed. They weren't really that fast. In the movies, you could never get away from them, even if the path was clear and you were in a pretty decent car. Early predictions were that T-Rexes could run somewhere between 10 and 30 miles an hour, which is whoa! But recent research shows they could only reach around 12 miles per hour. Anything more than that would have shattered their massive bones. So relax. After a couple months of training, even the most dedicated couch potato could get away from the sharp teeth of this guy. And what about our good friend Stegosaurus? It lived around 150 million years ago, so it didn't even get the chance to meet those cute baby T's. They appeared much later. We all recognize this dinosaur. It's the one with those ridiculous upright plates on its back. They were sometimes up to 3 feet tall. You could hide behind one. Scientists still don't really know why they had them, but they think Stegosaurus could have regulated blood flow through them, like a massive bony thermostat. They also believe these dinos could use the same system to control their skin color, depending on whether they wanted to look good or look scary. Sounds impressive, right? Well, at least something about them does, because this poor thing had a brain that weighed just a tiny bit more than a tennis ball and was around the size of a walnut. That's a dog's brain in a hippo's body. Troodon was one of the most brainy dinosaurs. A great all-around fella, excellent hunter, stereoscopic vision, 6 feet long, and a brain that just won't quit. What a catch! Troodon's remains were one of the first dinosaur discoveries in North America. One of the weirdest members of the dinos was definitely, well, let's just call her Sue. If you met her, you'd feel like you're looking at a big turkey rat thing with a super furry body. It might be the long-lost grandma of the modern ground sloth. Its buddy, Pegamastax, definitely wasn't far behind when it comes to racking up the weirdo points. It looked like something between a porcupine and parrot. But don't say that to its face, it had a couple of pointy teeth that could sharpen against one another. The largest and one of the heaviest known dinosaurs was Argentinosaurus. No one ever found a complete skeleton, but this beast must have weighed about 100 tons and was about 130 feet long. Compare it to the biggest animal we have now, the blue whale. It's only 100 feet long. When someone says dinosaur, you probably imagine some big-as-a-building beast that could use a tree as a toothpick. Some of them were gigantic, true, like those long-neck, long-tailed dinos. Those things were as long as an airplane. But many of them were small and lightweight, some of them the size of pigeons. The smallest dinosaur skeleton ever found was a tiny mouse lizard. Some dinosaurs had tails that were more than 45 feet long. That way, it was easier for them to keep their balance when running. But they didn't drag their tail along the ground. Dinosaurs kept pretty active and were quite fast, so they kept their tails in the air most of the time. Even though that naughty asteroid wiped most of them out, a lot of dino DNA stuck around and morphed into animals we know today, like birds. The first time anyone even thought of linking the two together was after they discovered a primitive bird in Germany, sehr gut. Later, researchers classified 2 groups of dinosaurs, depending on what kind of hips they had. The first group looked pretty familiar. They had lizard-like hips. The second group had bird-like hips. And a third group looked like Shakira, which is where her tune My Hips Don't Lie comes from. Actually, no. Also, plenty of old-school carnivores had bones filled with air, which is something birds have too. Birds may be the dinosaurs' living descendants, but some animals actually witnessed the age of dinosaurs. If only they could talk. Snakes, bees, sharks, crabs, lobsters, yum, crocodiles, cockroaches, even green sea turtles. They all actually saw real dinosaurs. So jealous. Carnivore dinos mostly walked on 2 feet. That way they could be faster and have their hands free to grab a little snackosaurus. Plant eaters walked on 4 feet so they could carry their heavy bodies. Some of the bigger plant eaters needed around a ton of food per day, literally. Imagine animals so big they had to eat a house-sized pile of veggies on a daily basis. Still, a huge bush a day keeps the doctor away. Is that where that started? There are around 700 known species of extinct dinosaurs. Sounds like a lot, but we probably haven't discovered them all. 5 years back, they found out about a new type of dinosaur, It had these stubby horns right above its eyes, which looked so much like the comic book character. They named it Hellboy. Hop on the bright side of life together with our brand new tees, hoodies, and more. Click the link to pick your choice. In the 90s, scientists discovered a crater in Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. You know the story. Around 66 million years ago, a meteor the size of Mount Everest hit our planet and filled the atmosphere with dust, gas, and debris that caused a serious climate catastrophe. It triggered a heat wave and a blast wave that went up into the atmosphere, partially blocking out the sun. Game over. Thanks for playing, dinosaurs. The age of humans never crossed over with the dinosaur era. Dinosaurs disappeared more than 60 million years ago, but they existed on Earth for 160 million years. Modern-looking humans have only been around for about 250,000 years. Only 59 million years to go, people. Not all the dinosaurs were on vacation in Mexico when the asteroid hit. They lived all over the globe. Some lived in deserts, while others lived in areas near ancient rivers surrounded by thick forests and rich vegetation. They weren't too picky, so they lived wherever, even Antarctica. But it wasn't covered in snow back then. Both poles had forests growing on them. Most people imagine all dinosaurs to be grayish-green because of the movies. Plus, we usually just think of them as giant lizards. Scientists still don't know much about dinosaur skin tones, but researchers recently found some evidence that dinosaurs totally embraced the rainbow. One little guy had white and orange rings on its tail. Dinosaur is Greek for terrible lizard. Scientists used to think dinosaurs were mostly cold-blooded like snakes, lizards, or other reptiles. Turns out they were wrong, maybe. Some evidence pointed to them being warm-blooded like mammals. Somewhere in 2014, scientists discovered that most dinosaurs were mesotherms, a little of this, a little of that. And it turned out many of them had feathers, just like little baby teeth. It helped them regulate their body temperature. Another thing we got from the movies and totally thought was real, what dinosaurs sound like. Producers usually mix together a bunch of animal noises to get that authentic dino roar. T-Rex is usually a mix of alligator, tiger, and the squealing of a baby elephant. And that dreaded T-Rex breath? It was just the sound of air going through a whale's blowhole.
The legend goes that a dwarf named Fafnir was famous for his strength and courage. Because of his qualities, he was tasked with protecting their kingdom. Dwarves were known to gather a lot of wealth, so a bit of added security was a must. I mean, they lived in a house made from gold and precious gems. But Fafnir also had another special talent. He was able to shapeshift. Tricked by Loki, the Norse spirit of mischief, Fafnir was taken over by his greed and the shine of his father's treasure. He decided he did not want to share any of it, not even with his father or his brothers. He stole it and ran away all by himself to a place he'd be hard to find, the middle of the desert. To protect his wealth, Fafnir transformed into a huge dragon. His new appearance looked like a huge snake, powerful and scary. His magical powers did not end there, though. Because the dragon couldn't fly, he also spread poison all around his new home, so no one had a chance to survive if they wanted to take his gold away. Fafnir was soon defeated by a young hero named Sigurd. The legend of Fafnir tries to explain why family is more important than greed. It also shows the many magical powers dragons possess. But the most interesting part is that it's quite a good example of how dragons came to be in our tales. But hey, this is just one of the many stories mentioning dragons. Just switch on your TV or peek into any bookstore, and you'll surely stumble upon dragons somewhere. Variations of dragon-like creatures have been described in stories from all over the world, from Asia to Northern Europe. Most of these creatures are depicted with reptile-like bodies, wings, and claws. And the scariest trait of them all, they can breathe fire out of their mouths. The name of these creatures comes from the Latin word draconum, which translates to huge serpent. But let's take a trip down memory lane to see how it all started. An Asian historian, for example, discovered some fossils back in the 4th century BCE and decided that he'd stumbled upon dragons. It's easy to understand why he got so confused if you look at a fossilized stegosaurus. It was 30 feet long, 14 feet tall, and covered in armored plates and spikes. The Nile crocodile might have gotten mistaken for a dragon too. It still exists today and lives in sub-Saharan Africa, but it may have been more popular in ancient times. When reaching maturity, Nile crocodiles can grow up to 18 feet long. But that's not all. It can even walk with its body off the ground, and some were even pictured standing on their 2 back legs. Goannas are dragon-like lizards that live in Australia. Large as they are, they also have razor-sharp teeth and claws, and are also known to even produce venom. It's easy to see why goannas may be the source for the Australian version of dragons. When humans first discovered whale bones back in the day, we had no idea these animals lived in the sea. Given their size, we surely must have thought they were dangerous. And because we rarely see whales, if we don't go underwater of course, they were poorly understood and easily mistaken for dragons too. Probably the most interesting source of dragon mythology is actually the human brain. In a book called An Instinct for Dragons, there was a theory which claimed that dragons existed in almost all ancient cultures because we had evolved to fear large predators to survive. We aren't the only mammals to do this. Monkeys have an innate fear of snakes and large cats too, for example. When you combine these natural traits with folklore, you get a lot of dragon stories everywhere, adapted to each region. Reptilian beasts with magical powers date back as far as the origins of human civilization itself. I'm talking about ancient Mesopotamia. Humans back then used to believe in all sorts of creatures, but their head spirit was Marduk, the patron of the city of Babylon. If you look at the artwork from back then, Marduk was depicted with a snake-like dragon at his side. It could be either nice or vengeful, depending on what mood it was in. If you want to sign up to become a dragon, the first thing they'll ask you at the interview will be if you can breathe fire, of course. So scientists have tried to look into some ways that could make it real for dragons to breathe out fire without damaging their throats. To do that, they examined the bombardier beetle. This eccentric insect can pack up some really hot substances in its belly. Once the creature gets bothered by something, it shoots out a fiery load of chemicals. In all fairness, it's not really fire, but it does burn, so it's close enough. Going back to dragons, they'd need to have similar glands in their throats to produce the same effect. But where do dragons come from? They didn't just appear out of nowhere, regardless of the source you consult. Some tales, like that of Fafnir, say that even humans can turn into dragons. But the most popular theory is that dragons start out as eggs. Some sources even draft a series of stages a dragon has to go through during its life. Everything starts with hatching. Dragons are said to eat their way out of those shells and break the sides of the egg. Then there's the wormling stage, which is what dragon specialists, or dragonologists if you like, call a newly hatched dragon. It's still small and weak, but don't worry, it can take care of itself pretty well. The rest of a dragon's life stages are pretty self-explanatory. There are grown-up dragons, then ancient ones. A dragon's life ends when it reaches the twilight stage. Some sources claim dragons never stopped growing. Others even say they never reach the end of their lives. They just pass on to another type of spiritual existence.
Now, thanks to new fossil discoveries and technologies, we're getting to learn more and more about the biology of dinosaurs. Some people don't need to know more than the fact that a few of them were colossal, terrifying, and vicious. But for those of us that do, the use of comparative biology, pigment analysis, and powerful new X-rays have allowed us to gain insight into specific features, such as their colors, eating behaviors, and the shapes of their tongues. Yes, that's right, the shapes of their tongues, which, for a long period of time, was something of a mystery. This is because soft, fleshy dinosaur parts are hardly ever retained in fossil form. But thanks to the discovery of some surviving hyoid bones, which are situated at the root of the tongue in front of the neck, we now have some insight. Most animals have this hyoid bone that anchors the tongue. The shape and complexity of the bone determine how free-moving the tongue can be. Scientists have discovered that nearly all dinosaurs had simple tongues that laid flat and were extremely similar to the tongues found inside the mouth of a crocodile today. Yeah, this crocodile. Go ahead and take a closer look. Nah, just kidding. Come on back. Let's take a look at some specific dinosaurs and start with the Brachiosaurus. Let me stick my neck out on the line by guessing that most of you will be familiar with this dinosaur because of its neck. You know, the one which was typically 30 feet in length. Despite its neck being its most distinctive feature, its name actually translates to arm lizard in Greek. It's common knowledge that the Brachiosaurus is one of the largest dinosaurs to ever have lived. On average, it reached 76 feet in length and 40 feet in height. It's roughly the length of 2 school buses and as high as a 4-story building. None of which were around in the era of the big guy here. Fragmentary leg bones and vertebra of even larger dinosaur species are known, but these skeletal remains are too incomplete to determine their exact size. So this guy may have been the largest dinosaur ever. A renowned herbivore, thank goodness. The Brachiosaurus is thought to have eaten up to 880 pounds of dry plant matter every day. Most of this was made up of coniferous trees, ginkgos, and cycads. This target might have been hard to hit for this dinosaur, as researchers have learned that its teeth were spoon-shaped and not ideal for chewing food. This means that the creature would have swallowed vegetation whole, as its teeth were suited to stripping it but not breaking up large chunks of plants. This, along with the dinosaur's body shape, suggests that the Brachiosaurus would have liked to feed as quickly as possible. Dinos like these didn't always make use of their ability to strip towering trees when dining. The Brachiosaurus traveled in herds, moving to the next location once they had exhausted all of the local vegetation. And I mean all of the local vegetation, not just that which hung high on trees. It's likely that the creatures supplemented their diets with vegetation at lower levels, especially after they'd done a number on all the nearby trees. This method of feasting was the most energetically appealing for this giant. By munching on lower vegetation, researchers believe that the dinosaurs saved up to 80% in energy compared to when foraging for high-up food sources. They have also discovered that the nostrils of a Brachiosaurus were on the front of its face and not the top. This is because we now know they roamed the fertile floodplains in their respective herds. For decades, it was believed that these creatures lived in deep, watery swamps. Let's look at another common misconception about a popular dinosaur. Please put your hands together for the Tyrannosaurus rex, which is arguably the most famous of all dinosaurs. Discoveries from the past 100 years have revealed that theropods had heavily feathered skin. Theropods are the family of dinosaurs to which the T-Rex belongs, so naturally, people began to think that the creature would have been covered in feathers as well. However, a study from 2017 took skin impressions from the iconic dinosaur and found no evidence of the structures required to support feathers. If a T-Rex did have feathers, they would have been limited to its back. Researchers accept that other large dinosaurs of the same family as the T-Rex have been discovered with their remains covered in feathers. An example of this would be the Yutyrannus dinosaur. But as of now, the accepted theory is that feathers weren't a common feature of T-Rexes. This makes it easier to believe that feathers were exclusive to smaller tyrannosaurids and were there as a means of keeping the creature warm. For a long period of time, researchers thought feathers were an exclusive feature of the theropod family. But this theory has been debunked. Just like the kid at camp who was kicked out of the top bunk. You know, debunked. Anyway, Fossil evidence discovered in Siberia now suggests that multiple different family groups of dinosaurs had feathers. The Siberian fossils in question belong to another species of dinosaur, Calindrodromeus zebicolicus. Oh, you think I mispronounced that? Okay, prove it. Now, this dinosaur, I'll call her Calinda, had a pelvis structure superficially similar to that of a bird and was roughly 4.5 feet long, about as tall as a fridge. Since the purpose of feathers on dinosaurs was for warmth, it's quite possible that dinosaurs from cold weather climates had more feathers than their counterparts in warm weather climates. In general, bigger animals struggle less with keeping themselves cool, so it's likely that any of the large dinosaurs who lived in these warm climates had no feathers at all. Smaller dinosaurs who lived in cold climates, on the contrary, had plenty of feathers. We now even understand what some of the designs and patterns of these feathers on dinosaurs looked like, thanks to the discovery of an ornithomimus, complete with feather and skin impressions. The name of this dinosaur is derived from Greek and actually translates to bird mimic. They were typically 11.5 feet in length, nearly as tall as a giraffe, and despite being omnivorous, had no teeth. Its other distinctive features included 3 fingers, which were all unusually the same size and length, and despite their thin bone skulls, they also had large brain cavities. Their legs were extremely long, in particular their foot bones. Combine this with their toothless beaks and long necks, and yep, it must have looked a lot like an ostrich. Although they're not as big as the Brachiosaurus or dinosaurs in general, they are bigger than any other bird in the world. And it wasn't just the body limbs of an ornithomimus that made it resemble an ostrich. They also had very similar feather patterns. Their heads, necks, and lower legs were mostly bare of feathers, but the rest of their bodies were well coated in downy plumage. This is what you call a bird's layer of feathers as a whole. It's possible, like an ostrich, that the dinosaur would have used this unusual feather pattern to regulate its body temperature. Despite some dinosaurs possessing feathers like birds, on top of also being their distant relatives, dinosaurs didn't have the type of feathers required to fly for most of their existence. Feathers found in fossil impressions or preserved in amber have allowed researchers to gain insight into why these creatures weren't very aerodynamic. The structure of these feathers appears to be very simple, with a poorly defined and flexible central shaft. These feathers would have better served any dinosaur as a fashion statement, as they would have helped attract the attention of other dinosaurs. These feathers also would have had the ability to regulate body temperature. Surprised to hear that dinosaurs had ostrich-like feathers? Wait till I tell you that their prehistoric distant reptile cousins had something that looked like fur. Allow me to introduce you to the pterosaur. Its name is derived from Greek and translates to winged lizard. Just like dinosaurs, they were initially thought to have scaly or leathery skin all over their bodies. But over the course of the 20th century, fossil examinations revealed that many parts of a pterosaur's body were furry. The wingspan of a pterosaur could reach the length of over 23 feet, about as long as a London bus. Its toothless jaw was very long and resembled that of a pelican. How could something that looks like a pelican be so terrifying? These creatures were coated in pycnofibers. Those were simple structures, feather-like in composition, but strand-like and fuzzy like fur. Further research suggests that some parts of the pterosaur's body had more complex kinds of feathers with branching strands. If this is accurate, it would be the first time feathers were found on an animal that was neither a dinosaur nor a bird.
Many terrifying animals live deep beyond the waves, like this vampire squid living 3,000 feet below the surface in almost complete darkness. This animal has a cloak, like a vampire's. That's why it's called the vampire squid. Deep down at the bottom, it can't use ink to defend itself. So this animal has developed an unusual tactic. It glows slightly to scare away predators. If this tactic fails, the vampire squid can turn its body inside out, revealing tiny spikes. When you translate its scientific name, Vampiroteuthis infernalis, it literally means vampire squid from the nether. Despite its terrifying looks, it's a harmless ocean animal. This previous creature was not from space, but this object definitely is. Before Elon Musk found a way to reuse rockets, NASA would simply drop old ones after launching astronauts into space, most of the time in the ocean or deserts. In 2012, Jeff Bezos launched a mission to find the Apollo 11 rocket. They found it by using sonar, but it was in terrible condition. It was sitting on the bottom of the ocean, not far from the predicted site. They were able to rescue the engine and reconstruct 2 of them. The most famous lost city is Atlantis, but sadly, we still haven't discovered it. However, Heraklion was also just a myth until one British pilot saw something that looked like a city while flying over the Mediterranean Sea. He reported it, and 60 years later, a group of divers went there. They were shocked when they found an entire city underwater. It was loaded with artifacts that could tell us a lot about the history of the place. Now it's one of the best underwater archaeological sites in the world. It's believed that the rising sea caused the whole city to go underwater. The Titanic sank in 1912. The wreck was claimed to be officially discovered 74 years later. In reality, though, a fisherman found the Titanic 8 years earlier while fishing in the Atlantic Ocean. He was pulling out his net when he spotted a head stuck in it. Luckily, it was just a doll's head. Years later, after the fisher had passed away, his son sold the doll to a doll collector. She did a lot of digging and research on every person who had a porcelain toy on the Titanic. She found the owner of the doll. Ava Hart was on the Titanic and had a doll with her. Ava survived the catastrophe by a miracle, but her toy didn't. Hart even wrote about the doll in her journal, and every detail matched the toy found by the fisherman. The tripod fish lives deep in the abyssal zone, around 20,000 feet below the surface. It's adapted to such immense depths and uses its tripod fins to stay still on the bottom. This creature doesn't have big eyes, but even if it did, these eyes would be useless in the darkness. Instead, the tripod fish uses its fins like antennas to detect any movement in the water. This creature doesn't have much luck when it comes to its love life, so it had to develop unique tactics to reproduce. One fish can be both male and female. The next bizarre creature is the lizardfish. It has tons of razor-sharp teeth, a huge mouth, and really big eyes, which it uses for hunting. All this makes the animal look freaky. The lizardfish lives at depths of around 11,000 feet in the midnight zone, where there is zero light. This freak of nature basically eats everything it can fit inside its mouth, from small fish to other lizardfish. On the other hand, when they see other reptile fish, they probably fall in love instead, because finding mates at those depths is not an easy task. Like the tripod fish, the lizardfish can be both male and female at the same time. When you think of a river, you usually picture it on land. Still, nature is quite unpredictable, and it created a river flowing under the ocean in California. It's running at a depth of around 2 miles. This river has everything that an ordinary river has: sunken logs, trees, and rocks. And despite its uniqueness, it's not the only one in the world. There are also others in the Amazon and Greenland. A terrifying creature was discovered near Angola's coast by a remote operating vehicle. It looks like it doesn't have a head or a body. It was sitting at a depth of around 4,350 feet below the surface. After doing research, scientists concluded it wasn't anything from a sci-fi movie. It was just a cluster of siphonophores stuck together. In 2015, some random guy was diving in Caesarea, and something shiny caught his eye. He reached out, grabbed it, and realized it was a gold coin. After that, he examined the bottom and found out that there were many more. He reported the incident to the local authorities, and they concluded that he had found Arabic treasure. The coins were made of solid 24-karat gold and were a few thousand years old, but due to the perfect salinity and temperature, they looked brand new. The coins belonged to a ship carrying cargo. It was caught up in a storm and unfortunately sank. One of the weirdest things ever discovered was found in the Baltic Sea. It's an anomaly that looks as if it was created by a different civilization. It was discovered by Swedish researchers, and they basically had no idea what it was. They had to ask tons of other scientists for their opinions. When you look at this formation from above, it's 200 feet long and looks exactly like a fallen spaceship. It's hard to believe that it's a natural formation, but spoiler alert, it's totally made by nature because the Baltic Sea has gone through many erosions throughout history. Most likely, the bizarre formation is the result of these processes. A group of divers in Madagascar were shocked when they found this 7-foot monstrosity of a knife on the seafloor. The speculation started immediately, and many said that the knife was from some giants that had fought megalodons and lived on Earth thousands and thousands of years ago. That could make a nice story, but the knife is most likely a movie prop that was lost at sea. One of the ocean's most bizarre animals is the frilled shark. It's believed that this fish is the reason for all those sea serpent stories that sea explorers of the past wrote about. These animals live pretty deep in the ocean, but sometimes they can be seen in shallow waters. It's super rare, but possible. The frilled shark has a big mouth sporting around 300 teeth. It also has a long body that looks like a lizard's, and it is truly a unique species of shark. Its prey can be half of its size because this shark's stomach is like that of a snake, and it can swallow huge fish or crustaceans. Spotting a few worms in your garden is no big deal, but after seeing a 26-foot long one in the ocean, you will make your wetsuit a little wetter. This worm is super rare, and it's completely harmless to humans. It's actually not a giant worm. It's a cluster of zooids that are stuck together in a worm-shaped formation. They usually only eat plankton, bacteria, and other tiny things that can be found in the ocean. Probably the scariest thing in the ocean that is 100% real is the Magna Pinna, which can be found at crazy depths of 20,000 feet below the surface. This monster looks like an underwater Slender Man, but it's just a squid with really long tentacles that can reach a terrifying size of 8 feet. This guy has only been seen a few times, and basically, we don't know much about this creature so far.
In July 1990, 4 Czech guys decided to go on an adventure to find the Mongolian death worm, the creature that might have inspired the monster you've seen in the movie Doom. They say it lives somewhere deep in the Gobi Desert. So they flew to Mongolia, hopped into an ATV, and hired some local guides to help them. All that to meet a creature that is up to 6 feet long, can spit acid that could melt anything, and is capable of shooting electricity at those it doesn't like. Legend says that these friendly guys spend most of their days hiding underneath the sandy dunes, but they'd like to come out during the wetter months of June and July. So the timing for a spotting was simply perfect. But the crew needed to figure out how to lure the creature. Sadly for them, no one knew what the giant worm liked to eat. So they built a thumper, which is a machine that made rhythmic pounding noises. They were hoping it would call the worm out of the ground. For 2 months, they searched the vast desert, crossing dunes and rocky plains, looking for any sign of the creature. But alas, it didn't really work out. Ivan McCurley, who was the leader of the 1990 expedition, came back to Gobi Desert again. He once tried to attract the megaworm with blasts, and the second time he used a small airplane to scout the dunes. Over the years, groups from America, Britain, and New Zealand organized big expeditions to the Gobi Desert to try and find the creature. Many others came from all around the world on their own and found nothing. The people in the West first found out about the megaworm of the Gobi Desert thanks to an American paleontologist, Roy Chapman Andrews. This brave man was probably the inspiration for Indiana Jones. In 1926, he wrote about the creature in his book. At a meeting with Mongolian leaders, Andrews heard detailed descriptions of the creature, even though none of them had ever seen it themselves. One of them described it as looking like a sausage, about 2 feet long, with no head or legs. According to him, the worm was so venomous that just touching it could instantly take your life, and it lived in the loneliest parts of the Gobi Desert. Andrews didn't think the creature was real, but he shared these stories again in another book. In May 2005, 4 friends from Great Britain who search for monsters professionally decided to try their luck. They made drawings of the worm and hired local people to hand out flyers all over the Gobi Desert. These flyers offered a reward to anyone who could give information about the worm or even bring them a specimen. They thought loud sounds that other explorers tried would scare the beast away. Some told them it likes damp conditions, so they came up with a plan to block streams of water to create wet areas that would lure the worm out. Their plan didn't work because it was too hard to build dams in the desert. They ended up using small traps, but didn't find any actual proof that the worm existed. But they did meet locals who shared interesting stories about strange creatures they had seen over 70 years. Over the years, stories of the monster spread around the world. In some of them, it's only 1 foot long. In others, it's as large as a human. It's white-gray or scaly and brown, or maybe fleshy and bright red. Someone said it resembled a snake, or maybe a caterpillar, or maybe it has wings and can fly. And some believe it could be a supernatural evil being without a body. Maybe the stories are so different, and the search operations are so fruitless, because the creature doesn't even exist. Or it could be one of many cryptids. Those creatures like Bigfoot, Yeti, the Loch Ness Monster, their existence has yet to be proven. In 1983, one scientist who was visiting the region heard that an old man had managed to catch the mysterious worm. He also learned there was a nest nearby. The scientist bravely approached the hole in the sand and put his hand inside. A giant creature dragged him in, and he was never seen again. Just kidding. He actually found a Tartar sand boa inside. It's a chunky, burrowing, non-venomous snake that has small eyes and gray-brown scales. He showed it to the locals to verify if it was the monster, and supposedly all of them said yes. Most Mongolians who know about the worm still believe it's real. Now, even though people call our supposed monster a worm, it's just what it sounds like in the English translation. Many Mongol cultures have used this word for centuries to refer to any animals they thought to be really dangerous, especially snakes, even non-venomous ones. So, it doesn't have to be a literal worm after all. Worms are soft and squishy, but a creature living in the harsh Gobi Desert would need to be tougher, more like a snake or a type of lizard without legs. Neither of these creatures can shoot electricity or spit acid like they say the death worm does. But some snakes, like cobras, can spit venom that's dangerous for people. If it were real, the creature would have a backbone, and explorers searching for it would likely find some bones or evidence left behind. And there are actually fossil remains all over the Gobi Desert. Scientists found representatives of over 80 dino groups here over the last almost 100 years. It all started with the world's first dinosaur egg nests. This discovery changed all the scientists knew about dinos. It was the first proof they laid eggs. In the following 2 years, the same expedition team unearthed over 100 dinosaurs and took them to the American Museum of Natural History, where you can still see them today. Some of them were swimming around in the Cretaceous Sea that used to be here about 71 million years ago. They resembled modern birds. The mystery of the megaworm is still unsolved, but there used to be another mystery scientists finally managed to explain. Back in the 13th century, a famous traveler, Marco Polo, not the guy from the swimming pool game, crossed the Gobi Desert. He thought he could hear mysterious noises, like the sounds of musical instruments such as drums. He wrote about it in his book and believed he might be hearing the voices of restless spirits. Scientists call these noises singing sands or booming sands. Unlike the squeaky sound you might hear when walking on a sandy beach, these desert sounds are much louder, like a musical instrument playing deep, haunting notes. Over the years, people came up with all kinds of ideas about what caused the sounds, like underground water or winds making the sand vibrate. Not all dunes can do this, and scientists wanted to figure out why. Sometimes the winds might cause a small avalanche on the side of a dune, and then you can hear the magical sound start. But this is rare. So, to study it, scientists had to help the dunes sing. They climbed to the top of a dune and slid down on their backs, using their hands and feet to push sand down. As the sand tumbled, the sound started softly and got louder. They could even feel the vibrations with their hands. So they found out that for a dune to sing, a few special things need to happen. The grains of sand must be the right shape, the dune has to be big, and the sand must be very dry, so no singing after it rains. Inside the dune, there's a hard layer of packed sand that acts like a giant speaker. This layer bounces the sound waves back and forth, makes the noise louder and louder, and creates a haunting melody that can fill the desert air. In other words, the dunes can play tunes. Yeah, sorry, I couldn't help myself with that one.
In the middle of a dense, foggy forest, you spot glowing red eyes. Suddenly, a strange clicking sound breaks the silence. It's not just in your head. Stretching over 2,000 miles from Newfoundland to central Alabama, the Appalachian Mountains hide terrifying creatures like Bigfoot and the Wampus cat. You might think they're just myths, but there's actually a chilling explanation behind them. First up, the Mothman. This creature is a superstar in the world of horror stories, but not many people know that its legend actually started in the heart of Appalachia, in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Back in 1966, two couples were driving when they suddenly came across a human-sized moth, about 7 feet tall, with glowing red eyes. They totally freaked out and sped up, but the strange creature flew and chased after the car, making a screeching sound until it finally disappeared. After this encounter, the group told the police that the creature looked like a tall, muscular man with huge, white wings, but they couldn't see its face because of the hypnotic effect of its eyes. Since then, the Mothman has become a famous urban legend. People swear they've seen similar creatures in other parts of the US, like Chicago and Gallipolis, Ohio. Theories about what people saw range from a balloon with a flashlight tied to it to extraterrestrial beings visiting Earth. But it's also possible that it was just a bird, more specifically, a barred owl. People probably mistook a bird for this creature because the barred owl looks eerie in the dark. It has spooky eyes and makes creepy clicking sounds. Still, these birds aren't huge, so it's strange how they've been mistaken for such a scary monster. Wait, what did people actually see then? The second strange beings are known as the moon-eyed people. This was a group of bearded, flat-faced, pale people with big blue eyes who supposedly lived all across Appalachia. Why did I say supposedly? Well, because no one could ever prove they actually existed. The stories about them were part of the Cherokee folklore, so we don't really know how reliable the information is. Still, their legends creeped out both locals and visitors in Appalachia. The moon-eyed people were said to come near a house at night, and people inside would hear them talking. But they were warned not to go outside, and no matter what happened, they couldn't watch them. In the morning, they'd find their corn gathered as if someone had helped them. Or the opposite, fields completely cleared like a whole group of men had been working there and taken all the crops. One of the most famous stories about them involves a mysterious stone wall found at Fort Mountain State Park. It was built between the years 500 and 1500, but no one knows who actually built it. Some people believe it was the moon-eyed people's work, and the ruins today are proof they really existed. They might not be delusional though. One theory suggests that the moon-eyed people were actually Welsh people. At the time, they were in Appalachia, mining the mountains, and the Cherokee gave them this nickname because they lived underground and had great night vision. Hey kitty kitty, come here. Oh wait, what's that? According to legends, the Wampus cat is a half-dog, half-cat creature that roams the Appalachians after dark, or just before dawn. And it can run totally upright on 2 legs. So if it comes running after you like a human would, you'd better hide fast and don't look at it. Rumor has it that its yellow eyes can pierce the hearts and souls of anyone unlucky enough to cross its path, driving them to the edge of madness. Okay, that's probably just folklore, but the real-life creature that might be hiding behind these legends isn't much friendlier. The stories describe the Wampus cat as a kind of underwater panther, so some experts believe it sounds a lot like a mountain lion. Apparently, they're really strong swimmers and cross a large lake without much difficulty. Now, let's say you're driving in the Appalachian region at night. Suddenly, you spot an animal in the middle of the road. You slow down and take a closer look. It looks like a deer, but there's something off. Its eyes are too close together, its head is misshapen, its neck is too long, and its legs move in unnatural ways, almost like a puppet on strings. Oh, and even if you honk, this creature won't move. It's definitely not afraid of you. This is the not deer. Although some people have reported sightings as far away as Texas and even Norway, it's definitely an Appalachian myth. One young woman said she was hiking when she spotted a doe. Suddenly, the animal looked right at her, and she noticed that all of its knees were bent backwards. Any direction a deer's knee is supposed to go, the deer's knees did not. Oh my. Anyway, the internet is flooded with people talking about the not deer and its creepy behavior. But the thing is, we can't find a single photo or video that proves it actually exists. So what could it be? One explanation points to sick animals. There's a neurological condition known as CWD that affects different deer species like elk, moose, and even reindeer. It causes the brains of infected animals to degenerate, leading to loss of body functions and abnormal behavior. Since the symptoms match what some people describe as not deer behavior, it makes sense to think this condition could be behind the strange sightings. The last creature on our list, the one and only Bigfoot. You know, that large, hairy, human-like creature that walks upright and roams the dense forest in the US. In the Appalachian Mountains, there have been Bigfoot sightings from the Adirondacks in New York all the way down to the Blue Ridge Mountains in North Georgia. This bizarre figure has haunted our imagination for decades, but scientists believe it could actually be a humble black bear in disguise. It turns out the American black bear is found in many of the same areas where people claim to have spotted Bigfoot. Studies show that for every 1,000 increase in the bear population, there was a 4% increase in Bigfoot sightings. And there are 2 main reasons why the American black bear could be the perfect imposter. The first reason, they're big. Adult males can weigh up to 660 pounds and grow up to 6 feet long. The second reason, while we think they primarily walk on 4 legs, they are perfectly capable of standing upright. In fact, not only are they capable, they do it all the time. They stand up to get a better look at something, sniff the air, or just to appear bigger when they feel threatened. When they do that, they definitely look like a human-like figure. And for those people who aren't used to being around bears, it's easy to mistake them for something more sinister and out of this world. Now you might be wondering why so many strange sights and creatures are said to live in the Appalachian, and the answer might be linked to the region's age. The process that led to the creation of these mountains has been going on for over 480 million years, which means they're older than Saturn's rings, for example. Over all this time, the region has gone through some drastic changes in its composition, creating a huge number of ecological niches with varying elevations, slopes, aspects, temperatures, and rainfall. And according to experts, the reason the region is so full of bizarre legends isn't just because the mountains are old, but because they still look old. Since a large part of Appalachia is basically untouched by humans, much of that ancient biodiversity is still around and seems unknown to us. This has created a landscape full of deep forests, mist-covered valleys, and winding rivers. A place where secrets seem to be hiding in the fog. And over the centuries, the isolation of the Appalachians only allowed these stories to grow.
So imagine stumbling upon a creature so huge it could dwarf even the largest known marine animals today. Scientists discovered the fossils of this beast on England's coast and believe it once ruled the waves. The new species was named Ichthyotitan severnensis, but thankfully for me, scientists nicknamed it the Little Stock Monster. Its estimated lengths range from 72 to 85 feet long, almost as big as a blue whale. Megalodon can't even compare to this. It was only about 60 feet long. And what's crazy is that this fossil we found wasn't even an adult, so who knows what their actual size was. The first piece of the Little Stock Monster was discovered in 2016 in the Westbury Formation. Researchers found a 3-foot-long jaw part that belonged to an unknown species. For years, this single fragment had been driving them crazy because they had no idea what that animal was. Then, in 2020, a miracle happened, of sorts. A father with his 11-year-old daughter found the second piece of fossil on a beach. This discovery led to more findings. Finally, in 2022, the last piece of the literal jaw puzzle was found, buried along the Somerset coast. This leviathan belonged to the Shastasaurid family. Both the Little Stock Monster and other Shastasaurids had one ancestor, so all the species in this family are super similar to each other. For example, all of them were the largest marine reptiles ever to exist. Although our Little Stock Monster is much larger, most Shastasaurids could grow up to only 69 feet long, and it's possible that the Little Stock Monster, when fully grown, would reach up to 100 feet or even more. Both of their bodies were just perfect for cruising the ancient seas. These marine titans were elegant and slender, with an elongated snout. Other marine animals at the time were smaller and looked more like dolphins. Shastasaurids had long paddle-like limbs adapted for efficient swimming. Their skulls show large eye sockets, which means they had excellent vision. If you were in the ocean, no matter what time it was or where you were hiding, they could spot you. They were also incredibly fast and could dive to great depths. Of course, all these things made them the most terrifying predators. They ate pretty much everything, including fish and squid, and you if you were there. They probably captured their prey like whales, opened their huge mouths, and literally sucked the fish in. What made the Little Stock Monster especially scary is that it wins in the jaw competition. For other Shastasaurids, their jaws were a bit weaker, so they hunted smaller fish, kind of like today's orcas. They required vast amounts of food. This shows us that the Earth's Triassic oceans had rich, productive food webs. But the Little Stock Monster has this unique feature. It could open its jaw almost 90 degrees upwards. It also had tons of powerful muscles around. Its jaws were horrifyingly strong. So while others were hunting some squids, the Little Stock Monster probably hunted large fish and even other marine reptiles. Fossils of Shastasaurids have been found everywhere in the world, from North America to Asia. This means that these creatures dominated and terrorized the oceans for millions of years, although even they weren't completely safe from scavengers. And that's exactly why we struggle to find these fossils now. Scavengers didn't leave any remnants of them. So, while we have some fossils of this marine family, they mostly remain a mystery for us. They lived in the oceans about 200 million years ago, in the late Triassic period. The Earth looked completely different back then. All continents were united in one Pangaea, a huge landmass. Some parts of this supercontinent were covered with lush conifer forests, while others were dry deserts and open prairies. It was before the famous Jurassic period, but there were already first pterosaurs and amphibians. It seems like those monsters were crazy resilient. The Triassic period was super unstable, but they survived through many changes in the environment. Well, until the last one. The Triassic extinction came out of nowhere. It was one of the Earth's big 5 extinction events. It wiped out almost all species on the planet, including these leviathans. It's still not clear what happened exactly, but it looks like there was a huge tectonic activity. Volcanoes in the oceans were going crazy back then. These massive volcanic eruptions have probably altered the climate and ocean chemistry, leading to the extinction of many species. Scientists have a theory that it might have happened because there was a rain of comets flying to our planet from the Oort cloud. This likely happens about every 200 million years or so. I wasn't around then, so I'm just guessing here. In any case, after the extinction, the Earth took some time to recover. Then it entered the famous Jurassic period. More terrifying sea monsters were on the way. One of them left us a colossal skull. This fossil is 150 million years old, and it also belonged to a sea beast from Jurassic times. They called it the Sea Rex. The name is very fitting. This monster could have broken a car in half with one bite. It was also discovered accidentally. A fossil enthusiast was walking along the Jurassic coast. This place is famous for having tons of ancient fossils, all because of the erosion in stormy weather. Typically, people find small spiral fossils here. However, this time, he discovered a giant sea monster fossil. Excited, he contacted scientists. They arrived at the spot right away and then had to carefully climb down a cliff to search for the rest of the skull. This fragment alone is 6.5 feet long. Turns out it's a newly discovered species of pliosaurs, giant predators of the ancient seas. Pliosaurs were among the largest marine predators ever. Some of them grew up to 40 feet long. They used their huge teeth to snatch and devour prey, including other reptiles. Well, at least those creatures are far gone. But what about the horrors that still live in our oceans? Recently, biologists discovered the world's longest animal, the one that's still alive to this day. They found it off Australia's coast, on the Gascoyne coast, a very mysterious and unexplored place. There, underwater vehicles stumbled upon a frightening 150-foot-long siphonophore. That's twice as long as many blue whales and 3 times as long as a humpback whale. Doesn't it kind of look like one of those toy string worms? But this creature isn't friendly at all. It's a string-like deep-sea predator. What's even more scary is that this isn't actually one creature. It's a colony of small clones working together as one. Basically, collective consciousness. Ooh, Borg. Together, they stretch out like a single long string in the water. This creature might be the longest siphonophore ever found, and it was discovered at a depth of around 2,000 feet. Siphonophores, similar to jellyfish, capture their prey by dangling stinging tentacles in the water. When their tentacles touch small crustaceans and fish, they get paralyzed, and then they're reeled up to the colony's body. Expeditions to Western Australia's underwater canyons were definitely worth it. Together with that siphonophore, scientists have discovered up to 30 potential new marine species. Among them were a new octopus or squid, a long-tailed sea cucumber, glass sponges, and giant hyroids, colonies of animals resembling upside-down jellyfish. None of them have been seen before in Australia, but most of them weren't as scary as the one that was recently discovered in the Gulf of Mexico. This creature is straight out of a sci-fi thriller, a 26-foot-long manga pinna squid or bigfin squid. It was discovered near an offshore oil rig at a depth of more than 7,800 feet. It has incredibly long elastic tentacles, which can be 15 to 20 times longer than its body. It holds them at right angles to its body, making it look even creepier, almost as if it has elbows. And yes, it's another deep-sea predator. These 10 tentacles probably help the squid trap their prey and drag it onto the seafloor. We barely know anything about this extraterrestrial-looking creature because they're very hard to find and study. And if you think their tentacles are awful, just check out these creatures with 20 arms. This thing looks like a facehugger. This new species is lurking in the frozen depths of Antarctica. Experts were searching for cryptic sea animals known as Promachocrinus, or Antarctic feather stars. They're kind of similar to starfish and sea cucumbers, but have an otherworldly appearance and can live up to 6,500 feet below the surface. It's called the Antarctic strawberry feather star. Despite its pretty name, its appearance is anything but cute. It has a bizarre strawberry-like body from which 20 spindly arms branch off. Its coloring ranges from purple to dark reddish, and the arms all have different lengths and thickness. Who knows how many more of such scary creatures we'll discover in the future?
Something exciting and kinda unexpected popped out among the rocks of the Ica Valley in Peru. The bones of a really old whale that lived almost 40 million years ago. At first, no one was really impressed because the bones they found were big and weirdly shaped, so people just thought they were looking at giant boulders. I mean, that's cool too, but things got way better when they realized those were the remains of a very large ancient animal that roamed along the coast of ancient Peru. Plus, it was probably the heaviest creature that ever lived. Sorry, blue whale, I know you worked hard to get to the top. The length of over 100 feet and weight of more than 200 tons brought you the status of the biggest animal on our planet. But it seems you've held the title long enough. Time to hand it over to our next candidate, and that one's really gigantic. This ocean beast was probably shorter than the blue whale, but heavier, with a weight that could be between 93 tons and 370 tons. If it's closer to the higher number, it'll make Prehistoric the biggest animal ever known to have lived on Earth. And it seems its weight was the result of having extremely thick, dense bones. You can see such bones today in manatees or some other early whales. Dense bones are a great tool for such marine mammals. This feature makes them heavy and allows them to stay submerged most of the time. But at the same time, if their body was too heavy, they would end up sinking all the time and they would waste too much energy to move back up to the surface. So, to avoid sinking, marine mammals need to have enough lighter tissues, like muscles and fat, to help them float in the water without using too much energy. Now, scientists didn't have the whole skeleton, which makes it hard to tell how big the animal was, but they used the ratio of the heavy bones to the lighter tissues in other marine mammals to estimate the overall weight of this giant ancient whale. Experts found these fossils about 13 years ago and spent the next decade freeing the whale from the rock. Its anatomy and age showed this whale was a cousin of Basilosaurus, a whale that had a long snout full of sharp teeth, and a sleek body similar to that of an eel. Even if Prehistoric wasn't bigger than the blue whale, it was still a giant that ruled the ocean depths. Unlike modern whales, there's a possibility that this ancient fellow was a predator that liked to go after bigger prey. And this also changes how we see the history of whales. Scientists used to think these magnificent creatures became really big about 5 million years ago when they started eating lots of small creatures. But here's the proof that giant whales existed even before that. But it's still unclear how this whale managed to find enough food to sustain its enormous body. Plus, it's still hard to tell what exactly this ancient creature had on its menu. It was pretty large and not such a fast swimmer, so it's possible it searched for food in shallow waters. Then it probably ate crustaceans, clams, or some other small animals hiding in the sand. One theory says it was a scavenger, which basically means it munched on remains of everything that would come its way. It's not so unusual to find marine animals in deserts. Many of these regions used to be covered with water anyway. The Sahara in Africa is a perfect example. About 50 to 100 million years ago, this was not a dry desert, but a shallow saltwater body called the Trans-Saharan Seaway. The land is not wet there anymore, of course, but people who lived in that area knew about it because they used to find old shells across the desert. The sea was about 164 feet deep. That sounds enough for a nice swim. Some would say this area looked like modern Puerto Rico, with lots of sun and shallow water. Mangrove forests were a common thing as well as seafloors covered with mollusks, like snails and clams. The marine sediment that was left behind after the sea had dried up is full of different fossils. And the animal that lived in that ancient underwater world didn't look friendly. Plus, they were much bigger than their relatives from modern times, so a regular-sized human would end up as a snack, not even a whole meal. Normally, when animals live on small islands, they can become much bigger than their relatives from the mainland. This is something we call island gigantism, and it happens because there are more resources or fewer predators on islands. Maybe the same thing happened in the Trans-Saharan Seaway. Even though it wasn't an actual island, the water moved in and out, which created little pockets of water. And specific conditions in these pockets might have helped animals grow bigger. So we're talking about giant sea snakes, catfish, and fish that no longer exist today. One had incredibly strong jaws, and the animal used them to eat hard things and even crush shells. Their teeth showed they were fierce predators other animals had every reason to be afraid of. They went through some changes when it came to diet, similar to some types of piranhas. And the competition to get to the top of the food chain wasn't a joke. Not when there were also such large predators as sharks, crocodiles, and ancient relatives of elephants. Sahara went through different phases. If you could use a time machine and take a peek at Earth's largest hot desert as it was about 6,000 years ago, you wouldn't have to struggle with sand and heat. You'd have a nice walk through a green and pretty lush place. In the past, people who lived in that area didn't leave drawings on cave walls that showed camels, sand dunes, and scorpions. All those things you'd see in today's Sahara. Instead, they drew crocodiles. That's additional evidence that the Sahara used to have a lot of water and plants enough to support these big yet scary animals. Around 3 billion years ago, Earth might have been mostly covered with water. Today, it's about 71% of its surface, but it seems that our planet used to be a giant ocean world with no continents at all, just some scattered islands. Scientists studied special rocks in Western Australia that formed in a place deep under the ocean called a hydrothermal vent system. To explain this better, it's important to mention two common oxygen types, O16 and O18. O18 is heavier because it has extra neutrons. O16 evaporates from water more easily, and as researchers studied an old ocean floor, they found a lot of O18, more than in today's oceans. This way, they realized ancient Earth had less dry land than Earth today. Australia is a good spot to conduct these studies because a long time ago, it also used to be a beautiful place with large animals and lush rainforests. But as time went by, the land became drier and Australia had more deserts formed, such as the Great Victoria Desert. Rainforest remained only on the edges of the continent. What happens with deserts across the globe is called desertification. That's when land that used to be good for growing things turns into a desert or something similar. Our planet changes over time, together with its climate. But desertification also happens because of human activities, like mining, farming, and building cities. And when land turns into a desert, it's a problem because it can't support people and animals anymore. Food doesn't grow there. There's not enough clean water, and animals lose their homes. To help with this problem, there's a plan many countries agreed to. They decided to work with farmers to take care of the land, fix damaged areas, and manage water better. All in all, to make our planet a better place for life.
In a frosty Canadian park, hidden deep beneath layers of thick ice, scientists discovered a bizarre skeleton they named the Frozen Dragon. The skeleton had been in the frozen ice for millions of years. It took experts decades to work out the species of this strange fossil. It was identified as a new genus of pterosaur. Pterosaurs were massive flying reptiles with wingspans of over 16 feet. Their heads were 3.5 times the size of their bodies. Pterosaurs lived 76 million years ago when they soared above the dinosaurs. Scientists described them as the biggest, meanest, and most bizarre animals that ever flew. The new genus has been named Cryodragon boreas, which translates to Frozen Dragon of the North Winds. In 2013, a young mountaineer was climbing one of the tallest mountains in Western Europe, Mont Blanc. He noticed a strange metal box poking out of the snow. The mountaineer pried the box open and found that it was filled with precious rubies, emeralds, and sapphires. the climber immediately handed the box to the authorities. It was discovered that the box likely belonged to a passenger on one of 2 flights from India that crashed into the mountain over 50 years ago. The box was valued to be worth over $200,000, and authorities are still searching for the heir to the small box of treasures. In northwest Siberia in 2007, a reindeer herder was on an outing with his sons when he noticed something strange in the ice. The man realized it was a frozen mammoth calf and immediately contacted the local museum. The calf was named Luba and was the best preserved mammoth mummy in the world at the time of its discovery. Luba had been in the ice for 41,800 years and is around 30 to 35 days old. From trunk to tail, the mammoth calf is roughly the same size as a large calf. If you're interested in seeing for yourself, Luba travels to museums all around the world. On the frozen continent of Antarctica, covered in layers of ice and snow, is Mount Erebus, the frozen volcano. The volcano was discovered in the middle of an eruption in 1841 by explorers on an Arctic expedition. The volcano is over 12,000 feet tall and has been active for the last 1.3 million years. Deep within the middle of the volcano is a huge crater filled with large volumes of molten lava. The volcano has occasional explosions, which means it's classified as being in continuing eruption. However, these eruptions are nothing to worry about because they're generally rather small. Back in 1991, 2 hikers were traveling across the Italian Alps when they stumbled across a body that they presumed to belong to a recently lost hiker. The duo trudged back down the mountain to report their unfortunate findings. Once the remains were recovered, it was clear that the body was not recent at all. Scientists determined that the Iceman was more than 5,000 years old and named him Otzi. The discovery was unlike anything scientists had ever before seen because the body was so well preserved. For years, Otzi was studied by scientists who discovered that our ancestors have a lot more in common with us than we ever knew before. Otzi was covered in ink body art. Research done on the contents of his stomach revealed that his last meal was dry-cured meat, similar to the bacon we eat today. Otzi has at least 19 relatives living today, somewhere in Central Europe. Scientists were researching ancient squirrel burrows in Siberia when they came across something interesting. One of the squirrels had hidden away precious seeds deep beneath the ground. The seeds had been encased in ice for 32,000 years. The seeds were for the flower Silene stenophilia, which had long since gone extinct. Amazingly, scientists were able to recover plant tissue from inside the seeds and grow an entire crop of flowers. They've since reintroduced the previously extinct flower to natural habitats all across the world. In 1930, a team of Norwegian scientists sailed around the Arctic Ocean, conducting research on the seas and glaciers. They reached White Island, a dangerous and icy land no human had set foot on before, or so they thought. The scientists were shocked to discover the tip of a small boat sticking out of the snow. Frozen inside the boat, they found scientific equipment and various personal items, including a jacket monogrammed S.A. Andre. They had discovered the wreck of the famous Andre Arctic balloon expedition. In 1897, Swedish explorers, led by Andre, attempted to travel to the North Pole by hydrogen balloon. No one had ever heard from them ever again. People only found out what happened to them when the wreck was discovered 33 years later. It turns out that the balloon had crashed on White Island only 2 days after departing from Sweden. The explorers traveled along the island on a small makeshift boat, but were unable to make it any further. The best preserved woolly mammoth ever found was discovered in an area of permafrost in Siberia in 2010. Scientists named the frozen mammoth Yucca, after the small village near where it was found. Yucca had been frozen for 39,000 years and is thought to have been around 6 to 8 years old. Because Yucca is so well preserved, it has been studied for years and provided new information about mammoths. In 2019, scientists reported that they were able to activate cells taken from Yucca's tissue. Maybe one day we'll have woolly mammoths roaming the land. From looking at pictures and videos of Antarctica, The continent appears to be freezing cold, covered in snow, and flat, except for a few small hills. Scientists believe that too. When studying the Gomburtsev Mountains in the early 2000s, they were shocked to discover that the small rocky hills were actually the peak of a gigantic mountain formation under a mile of snow. Using radar technology, researchers worked out that the mountains are really around 10,000 feet tall and sprawl across 750 miles. This is around the same size as the European Alps, except hidden under tons of ice and snow. At a gold mine in Siberia, a businessman was examining a nearby river when he noticed something interesting in the frost. It was a small woolly rhino calf that was later named Sasha. The woolly rhino has been extinct for 15,000 years. It's thought that Sasha could have been frozen in the ice for up to 39,000 years. Sasha is unique because it's the only full-body woolly rhino to have ever been discovered. Glaciers around the northern Italian town of Palo have begun to melt. Artifacts from decades and even centuries ago have been discovered pouring out of the ice. Personal belongings from soldiers have been found, things like diaries, photographs, and even love letters. Historians have even uncovered an entire cabin preserved beneath the ice. The cabin was filled with hard metal helmets and clothes. In 1845, Sir John Franklin embarked on an ill-fated expedition to the North Pole. The crew traveled on two ships, HMS Erebus and the ironically named HMS Terror. The expedition met with disaster, and both ships were lost to the icy waters. In 2016, the HMS Terror was discovered by a team of researchers. Despite being lost for 170 years, the freezing cold waters had maintained the ship in pristine condition. Scientists described the ship as frozen in time. Dinner plates and glasses were still on shelves, beds and desks were still in order, and even the passengers' luggage appeared to be in good condition. The HMS Erebus was also discovered nearby, but due to changing water conditions, the ship wasn't in great shape. The glacial ice surrounding a mountain passageway in Norway that was notoriously used by the Vikings has revealed hundreds of ancient artifacts. One of these artifacts was a giant unopened wooden box that was welded together. Researchers were beside themselves with anticipation, waiting to open this box. They believed it would be filled with Viking treasures or artifacts that would give us an insight into ancient society. When they opened the box, all that was inside was a plain old beeswax candle. It turns out that this box wasn't actually as old as they thought it was. By analyzing the candle, they discovered that the box dates back to the 17th century. The age of the Vikings had ended by the 11th century. It's likely that the candle box belonged to a farmer who was shipping it from his summer farm to his winter farm to light up the long nights. Over millions of years, our planet has changed a lot. Ice ages, shifting tectonic plates, global floods, meteorites. Whole species of animals have come and gone over millennia. At some point in all of this, we humans came along. Now imagine a place that was cut off from the rest of the world for 5.5 million years, possibly much more. A place that no human had ever set foot in before. In 1986, we finally found it, Movila Cave. You head to the airport and buy a ticket to Romania. Next, you rent a car and drive southeast. You're looking for Constanța County, right near the Black Sea. Your phone says you're there, so you stop the car and look around. You're in the middle of a deserted field, nothing but a wide, lifeless plain. Then, you see it. A hole in the ground. As you move closer, you realize it's a shaft that leads deep down into the Earth's crust. Before you descend into the darkness, you take a rope, a hard hat, a powerful flashlight, and an oxygen tank. Don't forget to wear your protective suit and oxygen mask. You climb down slowly and look around. It's pitch dark below you, and you feel a little uneasy. But something's off. The darkness. It's not cold. Warm air wafts up from the depths. Finally, you feel the ground under your feet. You look around and see a lot of tunnels ahead that lead into the depths of the cave. The tunnels are covered with dry clay. Moving forward on all fours, you notice something. The air is getting warmer and wetter. You come out of a narrow tunnel and find yourself in a huge cave with a lake in the center. Now for the hard part. You have to dive in. The moment you get in the water, you get attacked by the smell of rotten eggs. You've just touched sulfide water, and now smelly hydrogen sulfide is everywhere. That's not all. The cave is also filled with carbon dioxide. Normal fresh air on the surface is about 20% oxygen, but here it's only 10%. Not enough for us to survive without our trusty oxygen tank. Still, all those other gases give you a nasty headache. You turn on your flashlight to full power and dive under. Somehow, you need to swim through these narrow underwater rifts. There are a lot of them. It looks like an underwater maze. You're a little worried, but your O2 tank is still pretty full. You squeeze through the rifts and finally find an open area. You freeze. From above, below, from all sides, you start to hear the sound of crawling creatures. The flashlight beam catches thousands of slippery, fast insects. This cave contains 48 species, 33 of which are completely new to us. Strange white snails crawl along the walls, and transparent shrimps, even small leeches, swim in the water. White centipedes with huge whiskers and transparent spiders shuffle around under your feet. There are even 2 species of scorpion, as if you weren't scared enough. Water scorpions, and another kind, as yet unidentified. It's not exactly your typical desert scorpion. Actually, nothing around here looks normal. All the creatures here are white or transparent. They don't have eyes, just long legs and whisker antennas that help them navigate in the watery darkness. It's a sci-fi director's paradise. You couldn't make this stuff up. The deeper you go into the cave, the less oxygen there is. Amazingly, there are even more small monsters running around. The air is all methane and carbon dioxide. These bizarre little things have never seen the sun, never been out of this cave. The spiders, scorpions, and leeches get hungry, right? They feed on smaller creatures, snails and worms. But what do the smallest creatures eat? Just then, you notice something very strange on the surface of the water. There's a gross white substance that looks like foam. You touch it carefully. It's like wet toilet paper, and it tears as soon as you touch it. But it's not foam or paper. It's billions of living organisms, bacteria, called autotrophs. These bacteria make food from carbon dioxide, but they don't make it from the air like plants or trees. They use water. It's called chemosynthesis. These tiny bacteria excrete their unused food, and bigger ones come along and eat it. Then the tiny snails and worms eat the big bacteria. A whole wacky, unique food cycle deep underground in a random cave in Romania. That's why you need that protective suit and mask. It's not just for your comfort and safety. Without the suit, you might accidentally leave behind some human bacteria from your skin or something. It could ruin the delicate balance of life in this underwater world. The underwater cave is too small and dangerous for expensive scientific equipment, so you grab a couple of samples of water, land, and air and get out of there as fast as possible. The cave hasn't been fully explored yet. The Romanian authorities don't allow just anyone to scuba dive on down there. Let's see in a few years. Who knows what else they'll find? You're back at your fancy lab, and you start to understand why that cave is such a big deal. The conditions in Mobile are almost the same as in the first years of Earth's existence. Back then, our world was shielded from the sun by a dense atmosphere. It's actually possible that the microbes found in the cave are the same ones that were around way back when life began. These bacteria could turn out to be incredibly useful. They oxidize the dangerous gases, methane, and carbon dioxide. Basically, they make them harmless. Thanks, little guys. Mobile Cave isn't the only extreme place on Earth where life still finds a way to survive and thrive. Picture the Eiffel Tower in Paris. Now imagine 10 of them on top of each other. Now imagine drilling down that deep. Got it? Life still goes on, even this far down. There's almost no oxygen there. The pressure is insanely high, and it's hotter than the hottest desert. Welcome to the nematode empire. Nematodes are worms, and these wiggly dudes are tough as nails. When there's no air, no food, or it's just too hot, they transform. It's called the dour stage. It's a state of stasis, of deep hibernation. The worm's metabolism slows way down. It's like they go to sleep for a long time and only wake up when there's enough air or food around, or when it gets cool enough. And you don't have to dig that deep to find these creatures. Nematodes are found all over the world. They live in hot springs, in deserts, high up in the mountains, in the harsh cold of Antarctica, inside animals, and even inside the human body. You don't have to travel to Mars to find out of this world scenery. There are places on Earth that look unreal. The Danakil Depression in Ethiopia is one of the hottest, driest, and most inaccessible places anywhere on Earth. It's a large desert that gets almost no rain, but there's still plenty of liquid around. It sits on 2 active volcanoes, so liquid hot magma often flows up from under the Earth's crust. There are also colorful lakes full of acidic water. The salt from the lakes reacts with volcanic minerals, making bizarre figures that look like the backdrop of a sci-fi movie. Toxic gases and chlorine vapors rise up from the lakes, making it one of the most dangerous places on Earth. You need a gas mask to survive, but life always finds a way. There are living things here, even in a lake so hot that the acidic water actually boils. Microbes live happily in the lakes and surrounding rocks. If something can survive here, who knows? You can find another tough survivor in the Lut Desert in Iran. They've just discovered a new and special kind of crustacean there. These creatures live in small lakes that appear from time to time thanks to desert rains. This species can survive for decades in dry sediments, just waiting for a tiny bit of water. So these are all very small life forms, but are you in the mood for some monsters? Scientists have just discovered them swimming in the waters off Antarctica. Massive sea spiders, huge starfish, transparent shrimp-like things. In 1 month, researchers found about 30,000 sea creatures, many of them never seen before. Who knows what else is down there?
So, a mysterious discovery was made deep in the Red Sea, the so-called death pools. Woo, that's scary. In 2020, researchers embarked on a dive into the Red Sea. The mission spot was in the Gulf of Aqaba, between Saudi Arabia and Egypt. Near the end of their expedition, as they ventured deeper into the darkening waters, they noticed some strange seaweed floating above the seafloor. They decided to use a remotely operated vehicle and investigate it. Suddenly, they discovered these strange, motionless lakes of water within the sea. These are called brine pools. They're basically pockets of salty water deep on the ocean floor. And when I say salty, I mean it. Sometimes they're up to 8 times saltier than the ocean water itself. Mysteriously, they don't mix well with the surroundings. They formed millions of years ago, sometime during the Miocene epoch, back when weird creatures roamed the Earth, like me, and deeply buried mineral deposits dissolved into the water. The largest pool spans about 170,000 square feet. Meanwhile, 3 smaller ones are under 107 square feet each. At first, this discovery didn't seem that scary. But here's why they're so horrifying. Not only are they disgustingly salty, they also lack oxygen. Now hold on a sec, isn't that normal for something that's underwater? Well, it turns out the Earth's waters are full of oxygen, and at least half of this element on our planet comes from the oceans. Just like plants on land, marine plants such as phytoplankton, seaweed, and algae munch on sunlight and produce oxygen through photosynthesis. They release lots of it into the surroundings. Marine life then eats half of it, so only about a quarter of the oxygen that we breathe actually comes from the oceans. Just like us, sea creatures need this element to survive. Without it, they can't breathe and support their metabolism to live. That's why these pools are super dangerous for most of them. It's like a puddle of thick syrup for bugs. When they get in, the poor things immediately suffocate and pass away. Which is why the pools are surrounded by a graveyard of marine animals. But let's see how these things can exist in the first place. Have you ever tried making ice cubes from salty water? Spoiler, it's pretty hard. When you add salt, the water gets harder than usual to freeze, a phenomenon that has a funny name, freezing point depression. Oh, that's because salt interferes with the hydrogen bonds between water molecules. As it finally freezes, stuff like particles, dirt, or dissolved salts get pushed out to the sides. As a result, the salt's kind of squeezed out of the ice crystals and gets trapped near the edges in small bubbles or pockets. Something similar happens in the ocean when seawater starts freezing under super cold polar caps. The salt doesn't freeze with the water. Instead, it gets pushed out, forming a super salty cold liquid, the brine. And then it sinks down to the ocean floor. On a large scale, all this process also helps currents to form. Despite being so dangerous, the pools are still full of microbial life because microbes couldn't care less, they'll survive anywhere. There are literally thick mats of them in the brines. There are also some salt-loving creatures, like shrimps and eels, hovering around the pool's edges. They're being super creepy, waiting to catch unsuspecting prey that ventures too close to the toxic death pool. Ew. Well, it sounds icky, I know. But this discovery gives us some fascinating insights into how life might have originated on Earth. We already know from the evolution theory that we came from the ocean, but now scientists think that life might have begun in the deep sea in some super dark, oxygen-free places. These brine pools are like time capsules. They're one of the closest things we found to the early Earth. They can tell us the planet's history of earthquakes, floods, tsunamis, and more. For example, they have some traces of rainfall that happened over 1,000 years ago. And they can also help us search for life on other water-rich planets. For example, Mars most likely used to have huge oceans on it. Now, NASA scientists want to send a special instrument called HABIT for a special red planet mission to study things similar to our brine pools. This will tell us more about how life appears and survives in the universe. There is lots of unexplored fascinating stuff like this in the Red Sea. That's why scientists conducted the so-called Decade Expedition and spent around 5 months exploring the place. This expedition was launched by the National Center for Wildlife. They made so many remarkable discoveries that now we've got 77 new research papers. For example, they found over 10 blue holes, incredible underwater sinkholes that host unique ecosystems. They also learned that dolphins can use those blue holes to protect their young from predators. Scientists also found traces of great white sharks, a creepy community of deep-sea lanternfish living in low oxygen conditions, and even a new coral species. It's the most resilient deep-sea corals that also vibe just fine without oxygen, like microbes we mentioned. Speaking of which, research also showed us some new ancient thermal vents and large blobs of microbial formations near Farasand Island. Now, can you believe that with all that, we only explored 5% of the ocean? It's divided into several layers based on depth. Each layer becomes darker and more isolated from sunlight as we go deeper. The places that no sunlight can reach are terrifying. Now, the fun, cute layer with dolphins and turtles is called the epipelagic, or sunlight zone. It's so tiny, but even this layer is about 650 feet deep. Then we have the mesopelagic, or twilight zone. It's the layer of mysterious octopus, shark, and other loners, which extend to about 3,000 feet down. And then the horrors begin after this one. We encounter the bathypelagic, or midnight zone. It extends to 13,000 feet below the surface, about a half of Everest above you. Here we have the famous poor blobfish, squids, and anglerfish. Below it is the abyssal zone. It extends to about 20,000 feet deep. Since there's not much sunlight or oxygen, as we mentioned, most creatures here are quite small, like tube worms and shrimp. The darkness continues until we arrive at the scariest place of the planet, the place full of trenches formed by tectonic plate movements, the Hadal Zone. It's named after Hades, the deity of the underworld in Greek mythology. Just like Hades' realm is dark, remote, and guarded, The hadal zone is the deepest and most depressing part of the ocean. It starts at depths of around 20,000 feet and can go down to 36,000 feet and more. The famous Mariana Trench also belongs to this zone. Only 3 people in history have ever explored these depths in person, making it one of the least explored and most mysterious places on our planet. However, despite crazy high pressure, near freezing temperatures, and complete darkness, there are still things who manage to survive here. Guys like amphipods, which are critters who feed on dead material sinking from above, and the hadal snailfish, which lives as deep as 27,000 feet. So scientists used to assume that if there's no sunlight, there wouldn't be that much oxygen around. But one day, a research team decided to measure the levels of oxygen in one of those deep zones. Surprisingly, the levels were super high. They checked the equipment thinking that it was malfunctioning, but nope, all the sensors showed the same thing. Turns out the oxygen was somehow generated by rocks. These small potato-sized rocks on the seafloor are called polymetallic nodules. They're rich in metals like copper, nickel, and cobalt, and they're basically like small batteries. When you put a battery in salt water, it can produce bubbles of gas, a process called electrolysis. In the same way, these rocks create tiny electric currents, which are powerful enough to produce the same gases, splitting water molecules into hydrogen and oxygen. It's the first time we saw oxygen being produced by some non-living minerals. This is what scientists now call dark oxygen. It turned out that about half of large marine species, or megafauna, were living just on dark oxygen alone. All these discoveries are reshaping our understanding of where and how life could evolve. It means that we might be able to find life on other planets or satellites with low oxygen conditions, like Enceladus and Europa, the moons of Jupiter and Saturn, and they have large bodies of frozen water on them. Wow! So in the early 2000s, a geology major went on a field trip to the world's largest open-pit coal mine in Colombia. He picked up a piece of rock and noticed impressions of some prehistoric leaves on it. Then he found more rocks, and each of them had the same pattern. Back then, the student could hardly know that his discovery would help describe the largest snake that has ever lived on Earth. The student took his findings to a local scientist who called up the Smithsonian Institute and invited them for a fossil hunt. He wasn't that surprised, as he knew there were fossils in the pits of Sarihan. Back in 1990, another geologist found a fossil there and brought it to his office. He wasn't sure of what it was and called it a petrified branch. Years later, a paleontologist saw an image of this branch. He knew it wasn't a branch at all, but a fossilized jawbone of an animal. The scientist got so excited about the find that he flew all the way to Colombia. He wanted to examine the fossil, but no one had the key to its glass display case. The scientists couldn't wait, so they broke the glass and confirmed that it was a fossil of an animal that lived millions of years ago. After Herrera's finding, they knew exactly there were more fossils in the area. It took the team of scientists about 2 years to figure out they were all a part of a giant snake and not a crocodile, as they thought because of the size. They managed to establish it by looking at the vertebrae and ribs of around 30 giant snakes. Now you might think that fossils would get easily destroyed in an open-pit coal mine, but in fact, they were found under the coal that served as a protective layer for them. Sadly, the scientists couldn't find the Titanoboa's skull. Unlike jaws, which are extremely powerful thanks to their muscles, snake bones are pretty fragile. That's why they usually crumble long before the sediment can appear over them. But still, the researchers managed to find 3 skull fragments. Thanks to this discovery, they've made a full-scale replica of the snake's head, which supported the theory that it used to be one of the largest predators of its time. If you're starting to freak out, don't worry, so am I. They also established it was related to modern boas and anacondas. That's how Titanoboa got its name. It's basically a titanic boa. The huge snake was officially described in 2009. Titanoboa was thriving around 60 million years ago, 6 million years after the Tyrannosaurus rex roamed the planet. Back then, it enjoyed the climate of the area in South America, which is now Colombia and Peru. It got almost as long as a bowling lane, 50 feet, or twice as long as the biggest snake living today. It was as heavy as 4 giant anacondas. It got this long and this heavy thanks to a lucky coincidence. Snakes are cold-blooded animals, so they need a warm climate to live and grow in. Northeastern Colombia was perfect. It was about 90 degrees Fahrenheit when Titanoboa was alive. Titanoboa wasn't that fast, especially on land, but it most likely spent much time in or near the water. Our hero could swim at a speed of up to 12 miles per hour. Like present-day snakes, it could wriggle around and change direction really quickly. Scientists still aren't sure if it could climb trees. Paleontologists believe that Titanoboa had brownish or grayish skin. It was the perfect color for the serpent to hide in the muddy rivers of the tropical rainforests. But then again, I don't see why it would have to hide from anyone, given its size. The largest snake ever wasn't venomous, but it didn't stop it from hunting any animal it wanted. And although it could choose pretty much anything, its favorite meal was most likely fish. Whew. Scientists decided so based on the snake's palate and the number and type of its teeth. You can't recreate the giant's diet today, as all of those fish types are also extinct. When it wanted to spice up its menu, Titanoboa dined on other reptiles. It sneaked up on its prey and got them down with one quick strike. Its bite had a very special design. The structure of its jaws let Titanoboa clamp down on the body of its prey, so there was no escape. Titanoboa also had a mean set of thin and pointed teeth. They bent inwards in the snake's jaw like fishing hooks. This little feature helped Titanoboa get a grip on its prey and prevent the slightest chance of its running or swimming away. It could most likely easily swallow even large turtles and crocodiles. Now, all that sounds pretty scary, but we have nothing to worry about as Titanoboas are long extinct, right? Well, technically, as the temperatures on Earth are going up, it's quite possible that snakes might also grow in size. They love heat more than anything, so they should feel comfortable here. Of course, that would be a completely different snake, but it's not impossible that we'll see something similar to Titanoboa. But before you think of escaping to another planet, remember that huge snakes would need something huge to eat. Such giants prefer to wrap around something huge and swallow it. Most people would be simply too small for them. So unless the huge snake was starving, I don't think it'd waste its energy on attacking anything too little. Plus, like any other snake, Titanoboa had a sharp and delicate sense of smell, needing exceptional conditions and was sensitive to vibrations. A little too smelly, too noisy, too cold, too dry, or too wet, and the snake wouldn't go near this place unless absolutely desperate. So, if you live in a big city, your chances of meeting a huge snake like Titanoboa are about zero. Rural areas are something different, but the only place where the giant serpent would consider living would be near the equator. We already have some pretty giant snakes in the warmest regions of the world. Amethystine python, or less poetically, scrub python, is a gentle giant. It's the largest snake in Papua New Guinea and Australia. It can grow to the enormous size of 28 feet and weigh up to 77 pounds, which is about as heavy as a Dalmatian. Scrub pythons are pretty curious, sometimes slithering inside people's homes in Australia, but they're mostly harmless to humans. Their favorite food is rodents, bats, and birds that come to streams for water. Until then, pythons quietly lie in wait. They have heat sensors in the pit of their muzzles. They help the pythons better see warm-blooded animals they can have for dinner. The African rock python is one of only 11 living species of its kind. It's currently the second largest snake on the planet. This huge brown snake reaches lengths up to 20 feet and weighs about half as much as the giant panda. It's very serious about its meals, as it can catch an antelope and eat it whole. Even the cold-blooded crocodiles are afraid of this beast because it can easily eat one of their kind too. In 1958, a zoologist found a 4-foot-long young Nile crocodile inside an African python's stomach. According to the scientist, the python said, "Well, I don't know about you, but I find this whole thing hard to swallow." Actually, that's not true. Pythons can't talk, as far as we know. The reticulated python holds the record as the longest of all the living snakes in the world. The largest of these guys made it into the Guinness World Records in 2011 with a length of 25.2 feet. Its name is Medusa, and it lives in a zoo in Kansas City, Missouri. An adult reticulated python is large enough to swallow a human whole, or a whole human, either way. But these snakes are mostly quite peaceful and prefer to lie down without much movement. Although many pythons have dwarf forms that are much smaller than their full-grown cousins, reticulated pythons also have super dwarf forms. You can keep one of those as an 8-foot-long pet. Yes, it's considered a dwarf form, although it's longer than the average human is tall. You know, somehow I still don't find that comforting. In 2011, scientists from Chile found a weird-looking fossil in Antarctica that looked like a squashed football. Almost 10 years later, the rock just sat on a shelf in Chile's National Museum of Natural History with no specific label. It went by The Thing in the museum because it looked like something from a science fiction movie. When the scientists finally got their hands on the strange fossil, it turned out it was actually a giant softshell egg from around 66 million years ago. This one is more than 11 inches long and 7 inches wide. A regular chicken egg is just 2.5 inches long, and an ostrich egg is almost 6 inches long for comparison. So, the Thing won the title of the biggest softshell egg ever found and the second largest egg of any animal we know of. The only bigger egg that was ever found was that of the extinct Madagascan elephant bird, which is also 1.5 times as tall as Michael Jordan. The bird, not the egg. The Antarctic egg is also special because it's the first fossil ever found in this part of the world. So, whoever left it there must have been one big creature, probably a giant sea turtle that lived long ago, like a mosasaur. This is surprising because most scientists thought these creatures didn't even lay eggs. So this discovery could change what we know about them. The egg is also unique because it has a thin eggshell and no pores, which is totally different from most dinosaur eggs. It actually looks more like the eggs of lizards and snakes, but it came from a giant creature related to these animals. No known dinosaurs or flying reptiles from that time and place were big enough to lay such a huge egg, so it must have been a mosasaur after all. But we can't be 100% sure. Scientists did a lot of work and studied 259 types of living reptiles, like lizards and snakes, and their eggs. From this, they figured out that the mommy who laid the egg was probably at least 23 feet long, not counting her tail. During the late Cretaceous period, this part of Antarctica might have been like a nursery. Paleontologists have found bones of tiny mosasaurs and plesiosaurs in the same area, along with bones from the grown-up ones. Archaeologists in Norway made another cool but literally discovery and found dozens of arrows that had been hidden in ice for 6,000 years. They were melting out of a large ice patch in the high mountains, covering an area of about 45 football fields. In 2014 and 2016, when the summers were extra warm, scientists went to an ice patch called Langfoni to look around. They also found lots of reindeer bones and antlers there. Some of the arrows were whole and some in pieces, along with 5 arrowheads around the melting ice patch. This is more arrows than have been found at any other frozen site in the world. Some of the 68 found arrows date back to the Neolithic period, and the newest ones are from the 14th century of the Common Era. Ice is like the perfect time machine that can preserve whatever ends up there in an almost perfect condition. Langfoni became famous as one of the first ice patch sites after a local hiker found a 3,300-year-old leather shoe right next to its edge. Scientists are studying places like this to understand how people used these sites and how the ice patches from Norway to North America changed over time. Now, once upon a time, around 32,000 years ago, to be exact, a squirrel buried some seeds near a river in Siberia. Am I the only one getting the Ice Age vibes? Anyway, these seeds belong to a plant with cute white flowers. Thousands of years later, a group of scientists found these seeds buried deep in the frozen ground, about as far down as a 12-story building is tall. The seeds were surrounded by ice and bones of animals, like mammoths, bison, and woolly rhinoceroses. The mature seeds had been damaged, maybe by some squirrel, but some of the younger seeds still had good plant parts inside them. The scientists carefully took those out and put them in small containers to help them grow. And here comes the coolest part. They were able to grow the plants. Their flowers were shaped a little differently from the flowers of the same plant that grows today. After a year, the Ice Age plant even made new seeds. Based on this, the scientists suggested that permafrost could be a depository for an ancient gene pool, and we could find extinct species there and bring them back to life. Scientists on an icebreaker in Antarctica were looking for whales, but found something way more unusual. The camera behind the ship, which is as heavy as a car, detected 16 million icefish nests on the floor of the Weddell Sea. The nests were located about every 10 inches in all directions and covered an area of 93 square miles, which is slightly bigger than the whole of Washington, D.C. The colony even had a distinct border, which was a line in the sand. The scientists were in the area because they were studying a special spot in the ocean where the water was a little warmer than the water around it. In this warmer water, they found tiny animals called zooplankton near the top. When the young icefish hatch, they swim up to this area to eat the zooplankton before going back down to the seafloor to grow up and have their own offspring. Since there was so much food, it made sense to see icefish in this warm water. But they didn't expect to find such a huge number of icefish nests, much more than anyone had ever seen before. New Zealand's Antarctic Heritage Fund found some old photo negatives in a hut in Antarctica. They turned out to be unique images from the Ross Sea Party. It was a famous failed expedition led by Ernest Shackleton. He wanted to become the first person to cross Antarctica by land, from the Weddell Sea to the Ross Sea, passing through the South Pole. But things went wrong when their ship, the Aurora, was blown out to sea. They had to use the hut from another explorer, Captain Robert Falcon Scott. His goal was to be the first person to reach the North Pole, but sadly, he didn't succeed either. The negatives were made of cellulose nitrate and were found stuck together in the small box. The Trust took the negatives back to New Zealand, where they carefully separated them and discovered 22 hidden images. Many of the photos were damaged, but the Trust could still recognize some familiar places around McMurdo Sound, a well-known area in Antarctica. No one knows for sure who took the pictures. In December 2021, some scientists noticed a strange mark on the Larsen ice shelf, a giant sheet of ice off the eastern coast of Antarctica. They thought it might be a river flowing under the ice, so they drilled down over 1,600 feet to check it out. They expected to find water, but they didn't expect to see that the water was full of fast-moving creatures called amphipods. The scientists also found that the water in the underground river had unusual layers of currents moving in different directions, which they still don't fully understand. Another surprising thing happened during their research. On December 20th of the same year, a volcano erupted far away in Tonga, and the pressure waves from the eruption were detected all the way down in the ice river in Antarctica. It shows how everything on our planet is connected, even in the most distant places.
Hey there, curious history buffs! Have you heard the legend of the ancient race of giants of Nevada? Yes, I'm talking about actual giants that allegedly lived thousands of years ago. Now I know what you're thinking. Giants, really? Well, archaeological finds add fuel to this debate too. And here's where it gets interesting. Lovelock Cave was indeed used as a burial site, and some of the remains found there are much larger than average human bones. The cave is by the Humboldt Sink in western Nevada. It was once part of an enormous lake, which eventually dried up, leaving a number of smaller ones, including the Humboldt Sink. The cave became the home of the Site-Ka tribe. According to the legend, these red-haired giants were so big that they had to be buried in the cave itself. Indeed, later on, archaeologists discovered 8 to 10 foot tall skeletons. This legend started to unfold when a mining engineer named John T. Reed talked to the locals in 1886. Once Reed saw the cave, he knew he was onto something. The news spread soon, but the cave was attracting another type of attention too. The deposits of a fertilizer known as guano were discovered inside the cave. So a mining company began excavating the precious resource in 1911 and soon shipped more than 250 tons of the fertilizer to San Francisco. Unfortunately, some of the human remains and artifacts were neglected and lost in the mining process. This led to an official excavation in 1912 and 1924. After the top layer of guano had been mined, strange objects started to surface. Around the area, the earliest evidence of human habitation dates back about 4,000 years. The Lovelock culture lasted for some 3,000 years, and they left us with 10,000 stunning artifacts. The pits in the cave were like a series of time capsules hidden at different depths. Archaeologists determined the age of each pit by its depth. It turns out that many different groups used the cave for storage over a really long time, and the things they stored there give us a really cool glimpse into their cultures. It's like a giant ancient storage unit full of hidden treasures. What have the researchers found besides the giant bones, you might ask? Some other bodies were mummified using a method similar to the one applied by ancient Egyptians. These remains also had something in common with the bodies discovered as far south as Lake Titicaca. Both mummies had some red hair, yet there are scientists who believe this reddish hue is the result of the interaction with the environment in which the bodies stayed. So, while the story of the red-haired giants may be a wild and intriguing tale, not everyone is convinced. Some experts believe that the bones found in Lovelock Cave are simply the remains of prehistoric animals, like mammoths or sloths. But others insist that there's something more to the story. Other relics, such as finely crafted baskets and exquisite duck decoys made from tule fibers, were also found there. In any case, this cave is worth the attention it gets. By the way, you can still visit this cave today and see the pits of different depths with your own eyes. But let me tell you one thing. It's in a hot, dry, and isolated place. Archaeologists have made another discovery that seems to be straight out of a legend. They think they found the palace of the one and only Odysseus, who was the legendary Greek king of Ithaca and the hero of Homer's epic poem. Move over, Indiana Jones. We've got some real-life adventure happening here from around 1300 BCE. Apparently, this is the only palace mentioned in Homer's epic poems that hasn't been found. The excavations have been made on the Ionian Islands, and the view from the ruins found on the island of Ithaca are exactly as described in the Odyssey, says the professor who led the excavation team. Known to the ancient Romans as Ulysses, the Greek hero took 10 years to return home to Ithaca after the fall of Troy. For many years, Homer's other epic, called the Iliad, which tells the story of the protracted siege of Troy by the Greeks, was regarded as a myth too. But then, in the 1870s, Troy was rediscovered in modern-day Turkey's Çanakkale city. So, if they found Troy, who's to say they couldn't find Odysseus's home? The researchers were following Homer's words as a roadmap. The excavation site has a building complex with 2 levels. It has important finds, such as storerooms and workshops, a complicated drainage system, and fragments of pottery. It also has a well from the 8th century BCE, which is around the time when Odysseus is believed to have been the king. Yet, not everyone is convinced that the team has actually discovered the home of Odysseus. A British researcher named Robert Biddlestone insists that Homer's description of ancient Ithaca isn't very similar to the island that now has its name, and that Odysseus's kingdom was actually on the Isle of Cephalonia. However, Italian archaeologist Adriano La Regina might have a more realistic approach to this debate. He says that whether this find has a connection to Ulysses or not, what's more important is the discovery of this royal palace. Once upon a time, in a land far away, the Klamath Indians spread a legend about the creation of Crater Lake. Okay, maybe this land is not that far away, and it still exists. You can find it in south-central Oregon, in the western United States. Anyway, the legend has it that this lake was formed in a vicious battle between two volcanoes, Mount Mazama and Mount Shasta. Then the spirits of Earth and the sky, which are Lao, who ruled the below world, and Skell, the chief of the above world, joined the fight. It turned into a geological drama. During the battle, darkness veiled the land. The fight was over when Mount Mazama collapsed and sent Lao back into the underworld. Then the rain filled the pit and created a lake in the place where the mountain had once stood. Flash forward to our time. Scientists have discovered that Mount Mazama did erupt 7,700 years ago. Artifacts found in the area prove that the legend indeed contains some details about the explosion. The tale says that red-hot rocks were flying through the sky. This happened during the volcanic eruption that caused the mountain to collapse. This created the volcanic caldera, which later on got filled with water. What makes this legend came true story unusual is how long it has existed. According to researchers, these types of verbal stories lose their credibility within 600 to 700 years. That's why the legend about the creation of Crater Lake is so unique. So many generations, for hundreds of years, have been accurately passing down the information. This volcanic crater lake is now in a national park. It's famous for its deep blue color. The water in it is extremely clear. If you visit it today, the water you'll see won't be the same as for someone who will visit the place 250 years later. Because there are no rivers flowing into or out of the lake, the existing water evaporates and the lake gets filled again by rain and snowfall. Basically, every 250 years, the water is replaced. Plus, this lake is almost 2,000 feet deep, which makes it the deepest lake in the United States. Swimming is okay in the lake, but there's only one legal and safe trail to get to the shore. There are other activities, such as fishing and boat tours. Shared human experiences, such as birth, marriage, and aging, may explain why certain tales are shared globally. Similar struggles and obstacles faced by humans around the world generate similar themes in traditional stories about love, parenting, and mortality. So, do you have legends or tales you've heard of from your grandparents? Who knows? Maybe your ancestors too witnessed a cool historical event.
Strange and amazing items are discovered often, but figuring out what our ancestors were up to is pretty tough. Especially when all you have are just some rusty cups and cave drawings. It's no surprise that even the experts in lab coats sometimes make mistakes. But it's not just about dusty plates and huge stones. Sometimes there's even humans with large heads. So grab your digging tools and let's travel back to ancient times to explore incredible societies that even scientists can't fully explain. Sardinia may look idyllic now, but I'm not gonna lie, I wouldn't fancy visiting it 3,000 years ago. Rumor has it, terrible giants roamed around this island back then. People even talk about finding human skeletons over 13 feet tall there, although nobody's ever shown anything to prove it. But the stories will make you wonder because some weird stuff has definitely happened. In 1974, over 5,000 pieces of broken stone artifacts were found in a part of the island called Monte Prama, but instead of being displayed in a museum, they were locked up in an underground vault for about 30 years. Sounds a bit suspicious, doesn't it? When they were finally displaced in 2005, scientists put the pieces together to find statues of 38 giant men standing 8 feet tall. Not quite as tall as the legendary skeletons, but still pretty huge. It's thought these statues were made by the Nuragic people, who lived on the island a long time ago. Besides giant statues, they also built over 8,000 massive stone buildings. Perhaps Nuragic weren't giants themselves, but they definitely liked their things big. I do too. I like a big number of likes on our videos. That would be pretty great. Thank you if you liked this and subscribed. Now back to the video. You and I are pretty smart, but we might not be the smartest humans ever. Actually, we might not even be the smartest species. Since 1913, some skull fossils found in South Africa have hinted at a possibly smarter contender called Boscop man. This human-like species might have lived as recently as 10,000 years ago. Their skull suggests they had really big heads, which means their brains could have been 30% bigger than ours. Wow! Their average IQ could have been around 149, making them among the smartest 0.05% of people today. But if a Boscop brainiac was so much smarter, why are they not around and we are? Well, bigger isn't always better, you know. Our brains are a lot bigger than our ape relatives, mainly in the prefrontal cortex. This part helps with high-level tasks like making decisions, remembering things short-term, and being aware of ourselves. The parts of the brain that handle our senses and movements haven't really grown much. So, maybe the Boscop spent too much time dwelling on the past rather than doing practical things like hunting. But this is all just guessing. We really don't know what happened to these clever cousins of ours. Some people even argue that Boscops weren't any different from us, with the only evidence being parts of skulls. The jungle is huge. Did you know the Amazon rainforest is home to about 30% of all the world's plant and animal species? That's impressive. However, the history of one native species, humans, has long puzzled scientists. The mysterious Kasarabe people lived here for hundreds of years and then vanished around 1400 AD. People thought the Amazon only had a few scattered tribes, but recently we discovered big, unusual shapes in the ground called geoglyphs. These might look like simple shallow ditches, but they're actually the remains of a vast civilization that spread over 5,000 square miles and includes about 450 markings, some as wide as 1,300 feet. That's insane! They likely contained ceremonial buildings and could have hosted up to 1 million people as recently as 550 years ago. Thanks to new technology like LiDAR, which uses a safe laser to map the forest without harming it, we can explore deeper. In 2019, some scans showed miles of raised roads and pathways and even pyramids over 70 feet tall. They found 26 separate settlements, 2 of which were at least 250 acres each. Damn, that's like 330 soccer fields. It's not certain what happened to the Kasarabe people. Maybe European conquistadors drove them out. Maybe the most baffling ancient civilization is one we've never actually found a trace of. Yep, I'm talking about Atlantis, the grand city that supposedly sank into the ocean. The first mentions of Atlantis come from the ancient Greek philosopher Plato, who talked about a great city near the Strait of Gibraltar. But for ages, everyone just thought Plato made up Atlantis as a perfect version of his own Athens. So why, about 12,000 years after it supposedly vanished, do we still wonder if it might be real? Well, in the 19th century, U.S. Congressman Ignatius Donnelly wrote a book giving 13 reasons why he thought Atlantis was more than just a myth. Then, in 1965, some folks thought they actually found Atlantis when they discovered the Richat structure, a massive 25-mile-wide dome in Mauritania, Africa. It's so big that you can see the whole thing from space. 2 astronauts flying over the Sahara Desert spotted this giant eye staring back at them and thought they'd made the discovery of a lifetime. Unfortunately, there's no solid evidence linking this structure to Atlantis. It's believed to have formed from volcanic activity about 100 million years ago. But it does look suspicious, doesn't it? Still, we're no closer to knowing the truth. Imagine going back to about 3,300 BCE and finding yourself in South Asia. Welcome to the Harappan civilization. These people were way ahead of their time. They had cities like Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, complete with baked brick houses, sophisticated drainage systems, and even public baths. This place might have had over 5 million people, making it one of the densest regions at the time. They also invented a system of standardized weights that was incredibly useful for traders. And trading they did. These people had connections stretching all the way to the Middle East, thanks to their great skills in metallurgy. They even had a form of ancient branding. The seals were used to stamp clay on trade goods. Despite being so advanced with a thriving urban life, there's a whole bunch of mystery shrouding their language and script. We've got bits and pieces of their writing, but no one's deciphered them yet, even with all the technology we have today. We also still don't know how exactly their society worked. It looks like they didn't flaunt their social status as much as other civilizations. No grand palaces or massive monuments. Instead, their largest buildings might have been granaries. They sure were practical. Unfortunately, all good things must come to an end. Around 1800 BCE, this bustling civilization started to decline, possibly due to shifts in river patterns. As the environment changed, the Harappans packed up, moving towards more hospitable lands. Ever heard of the Minotaur? The beast with a bull's head and a man's body, hunting the bravest travelers in a massive maze. Well, this wasn't just any old tale. It was one of the most popular dramas of the ancient world, and it was inspired by this place, the island of Crete. The Minoans lived here during the Bronze Age. They had stunning palaces, amazing frescoes, and a culture so rich it still fascinates historians to this day. They built places like Knossos, which was so complex with its multi-story buildings and elaborate hallways that it might have inspired the whole labyrinth myth. Their engineering was so ahead of its time that even their drainage systems were more advanced than what many of us have today. Let me know in the comments which of these stories you find the most fascinating, and thanks for watching.
Most of the ocean is still shrouded in mystery, whether we're talking about dark corners or creatures that are hiding in the depths. But sometimes it gives us a peek into scary things it hides in its cold, dark depths. Like when you hear on the news that there are some deep-sea creatures washed ashore after a powerful storm once again. Some just look weird, while others are real monsters that live at depths of more than 3,300 feet. The coldest and deepest parts of the ocean have created one specific phenomenon called gigantism. So, sea spiders, squids, worms, and many other animals, mostly invertebrates, or creatures without backbones, they're all way bigger and scarier than the versions we see in the more shallow areas. In the Pacific depths, you can see a sea sponge as large as a minivan. Or what about the colossal squid that lives in sub-Antarctic waters and is nearly 14 times longer than the arrow squid, a type that mostly lives in New Zealand? Researchers found many of these underwater monsters in the abyssal zone of the ocean. Back in 2021, the researchers showed images of the giant phantom jelly. It was at a depth of 3,200 feet. Its tentacles were 33 feet long. Wow, I wouldn't like to face that one on the beach. It probably eats only small fish and plankton, but it can swim to depths of more than 21,900 feet. And down there, this giant jelly doesn't have enough food. How does it survive then? Scientists haven't figured it out yet. And there are even more questions related to the giant squid, the biggest one ever found. This monster is 43 feet long, with a weight of nearly a ton. Imagine if those tentacles would grab your car, or something like that. They would smash it like it was a toy. There's no light in the abyssal zone. Sun rays just can't penetrate that deep. So there's no algae or underwater plants there. Local animals mostly eat snow. Marine snow is not like the regular one you build a snowman with. It consists of any small flakes or remains that fall from the surface of the ocean. Maybe even some leftovers that animals up there couldn't eat. So it's not much. But apparently, it's enough for very large creatures that hide deep down there, like giant squids. Squids that generally live at such depths don't bother going after their prey. They just wait until the poor animal swims right up to their long tentacles and falls into a trap. It may not be the best method ever, because not many animals will even swim into these dark, cold parts. But it's the method that saves energy. A giant squid eats only 1 ounce of fish daily, which is approximately 45 calories. That's nearly 50 times fewer calories than an average person should eat per day. So when a squid gets 1 fish, it saves it for a couple of days. I hope giant squids won't get the idea to go to the surface and look for food when there's not enough of it in the abyssal zone. And I hope even more that giant Greenland sharks won't get that same idea. You can find them at depths of up to 7,200 feet. They're twice as slow as we usually walk. They swim at a speed of 1.12 feet per second. Their slowness is part of the energy-saving mechanism that creatures down there need to survive. But they can speed up in the form of short bursts when they need to catch prey. But they kinda change their diet from predator to scavenger, considering their environment. There will be more leftovers falling from the surface than animals to go after. Greenland sharks grow just 0.4 inches per year, and they're mostly 20 feet long, which means they live for a very long time, sometimes up to 400 years. They also have a slow metabolism, and that's one of the main factors for their long life, too. Greenland sharks like to spend their time in cold waters. They're adapted to that, since their tissues have specific chemical compounds that prevent the forming of ice crystals all over their body. That means they have some sort of natural antifreeze. So what makes them so big? Scientists are still not sure, but some theories try to explain it. There's this thing called Kleiber's rule that says bigger animals tend to be more efficient. Just take a small fish and compare it to a whale with a mass hundreds of times bigger. The whale has a greater metabolism. It conserves energy more efficiently and loses less of it to the surroundings through heat. Moving on, bigger animals can ingest bigger prey. They're more likely to go through tough issues in their environment or defend themselves from predators going after them. Also, the body gets bigger when temperatures are lower. The Greenland shark is a perfect example. So are giant sea spiders. Sea spiders are generally common, and you find some very small ones at 0.04 inches. But in deeper parts of the Antarctic, they become 3-foot-long giants. They grow so big because the cold water has more oxygen. That way, more of it diffuses into the animal's body, and that allows it to grow bigger. Yeah, both as a creature and a nightmare. And how about this giant tube worm? Researchers found it accidentally while they were exploring the mysteries of the Pacific Ocean floor. They stumbled upon unusual hydrothermal vents. Volcanic heat is a thing that gets them going. As water seeps down through faults or cracks in the rock, these vents change their direction. When the water gets out of the vent, it's rich in different minerals and chemicals. Most animals wouldn't survive being around this toxic soup of chemicals, but not these tube worms. They came as a true surprise, because not only are they not bothered by these toxic vents and the almost boiling temperature of the water, but they developed entire ecosystems there. They're unique because they don't need sunlight to survive. Instead, small bacteria are their main source of energy. That bacteria gets their energy directly from these toxic chemicals. So it's not photosynthesis, but a process called chemosynthesis. And these tube worms don't have mouths. These bacteria live inside them. Strange story, huh? Plus, these scary worms reach up to 8 feet. Giant isopods are no better either. They lurk at the depths of the ocean of 1,640 feet or more below, far away from the sunlight, looking like some monstrous wood lice. They spend most of their time on the seabed, hoping to find some food falling from higher levels of the ocean. Check out their small hooked claws at the ends of their legs. Isopods use them to remain more stable while moving around the ocean floor. Since there's no light, they have long antennae that help them feel their way around. These sensory antennas are about half the length of their body. Giant isopods have pretty big eyes compared to their body size, too. They can grow over 12 inches from head to tail. And these fellas are really patient. Remember how we said animals down there rarely get food? Sometimes they need to wait for years to get a proper meal. That's why their metabolism is amazingly slow.
5 years later.
They can go for 5 years without eating anything. Imagine that. I get hungry just talking about this. In 2006, a biologist did research to compare the differences between the shallows and the deep sea regions. He realized the deep sea mirrors the island rule. First, isolated parts of land develop biodiversity you won't find anywhere else. Second, small-bodied life there grows much bigger when it's isolated, compared to life on large land masses. Resources are limited, but also competition and predators. And we don't know much about these deep-sea creatures. It's too expensive and too complicated to carry out such research. So we'll just wait for more raging storms to show us at least part of the monstrous world cold ocean depths hide. Think you know what lurks in the depths of the ocean? While nearly 95% of our oceans haven't been explored yet, it's hard not to let your imagination run wild. But thanks to brave explorers, deep-sea cameras, and awesome archaeologists, we do know about some pretty incredible sea creatures living in our waters today, and millions of years ago. From the 9-foot spider crab to the 60-foot prehistoric megalodon, these sea dwellers come in all shapes and sizes. But let's focus on sea creatures famous for their huge size. Can you guess which living species of whale is the largest? Well, it's not the orca, but that's a good guess. The orca is a toothed whale that can grow to anywhere from 23 feet to 32 feet, which is slightly smaller than a school bus. How about the narwhal? Nope, they're not the biggest either. These unicorns of the sea live mainly in Arctic waters and only grow 13 feet to 20 feet in length, and that's including their 9-foot tusk. Tired of guessing? Okay, I give in. The largest whale that still exists today is the blue whale. At a jaw-dropping 82 feet to 105 feet, the blue whale is not only the biggest whale we know of, but is currently the largest animal to have ever lived on Earth. Seriously. These animals are bigger than a T-Rex, and even the prehistoric megalodon. If you were to put a blue whale next to a school bus, it would look like it could swallow it. Think about that. According to National Geographic, a blue whale's tongue can weigh the same as an elephant. And their hearts can weigh as much as a car. That doesn't even sound possible. It's no wonder these giants need to eat about 4 tons of krill every day. While there aren't too many animals living today that can compete with the blue whale's epic proportions, there is an entirely different species that is a good contender, and it's not quite what you would expect. It's a jellyfish. No, I'm not talking about the little jellyfish that wash up on the shore and ruin a perfectly good day at the beach. I'm referring to the lion's mane jellyfish, the biggest jellyfish around. This invertebrate can grow up to 120 feet long. They also come in different gorgeous colors like red, purple, or even shades of orange. As if their length wasn't impressive, the lion's mane jellyfish boast a whopping 8 sets of 70 to 150 tentacles. That means they can have up to 1,200 in total. And here's the giant oceanic manta ray, the largest type of ray in the world. Their wingspan can be longer than a bus. These guys can reach 30 feet in length. They also have the biggest brain compared to body size among all fish. Unlike their stingray cousins, mantas don't have venomous tails. And while the lion's mane jellyfish and the blue whale are yet to be beaten for the longest sea creature, there is one marine creature that can grow even larger in length. The Portuguese Physalia physalis, tentacles and all, can reach a length of 165 feet long, and that's according to mentalfloss.com. While this thing may look a lot like a jellyfish, it's actually known as a siphonophore, and there are hundreds and sometimes thousands of them that are genetically identical. Their long tentacles help the organism catch prey, and its sting is fatal to most animals, even humans in some cases. What's even creepier is that if one of the tentacles comes off the organism for whatever reason, it can float around the water for days before decomposing. Even if it's detached, this tentacle can still sting you. But don't go running out of the ocean just yet. Your chances of being hurt by a Portuguese Phacelia phasalis sting are pretty slim. However, if you do get stung, the side effects aren't pretty, with welts, stomach cramps, an elevated heart rate, and an upset stomach. While you don't want to go anywhere near these long creatures, they sure are pretty to look at. Check out all those colors. The Shastasaurus is the biggest marine reptile that has ever existed. These predators lived during the late Triassic period, about 210 million years ago. These amazing giants could reach lengths of up to 69 feet and weighed more than 75 tons. This made the Shastasaurus as heavy as a blue whale. And if you could stand this creature up vertically, it'd be as tall as a 7-story building. Despite appearances, the Shastasaurus was actually pretty slim for its size. Its ribcage was only 6 feet across. You'd think that this big guy was chowing down on other dinosaurs, but that's not the case at all. This reptile survived on a diet that consisted of small fish and cephalopods, like octopuses and squids. The Albertonectes is a bright representative of the plesiosaur family, meaning that this marine reptile had a small head on an incredibly long neck and large flipper-like limbs that helped it move through the water. These creatures occupied the seas around North America 76 to 70 million years ago. The length of this sea monster could reach 38 feet, with its neck taking up 23 feet of that length. Its neck was a true record breaker. It had a whopping 76 bones in it. No other animal known to humankind has had so many vertebrae in its neck. Scientists aren't sure why they needed such a lengthy neck. They might have used it to collect shellfish off the seabed, or perhaps it helped them capture their main prey, fish and squids. This aquatic reptile also had gastroliths in its stomachs. Some of them were as big as 5.5 inches in diameter. The Tylosaurus belonged to the Mosasaur family. It dominated the shallow seas of North America about 85 to 80 million years ago. This was an enormous predator, with the biggest representatives reaching 45 feet in length. It had a narrow hydrodynamic body with a blunt, powerful head that the animal used to ram and stun its prey. Its body was equipped with agile flippers and a long tail decorated with a maneuverable fin. The Tylosaurus was a carnivore, and its diet included not only fish, turtles, and small sharks, but also other mosasaurs, plesiosaurs, and flightless birds. Meet Ophthalmosaurus. This prehistoric reptile thrived during the late Jurassic period and lived in oceans all over the world. Ophthalmosaurus weighed somewhere around 6,000 pounds and grew to approximately 16 feet long, according to newdinosaurs.com. That's about the same length as the beluga whale that exists today. It's too bad these guys went extinct before we had a chance to see them ourselves, as their cartoonish wide eyes and dolphin-like features are pretty darn cute. Of course, the Ophthalmosaurus evolved over time to become ophthalmologists, or eye doctors that we know today. No, that's just a lie. Just testing you. The Mosasaurus is a truly gigantic predator that dominated the seas all over the world about 66 million years ago. According to fossil evidence, some specimens could be more than 50 feet in length. This fact makes the Mosasaurus the biggest marine carnivore of its time. One of the most terrifying things about this creature was its crocodile-like head, decorated with literally hundreds of razor-sharp teeth, neatly organized in 2 rows on both jaws. The thing is that it was pretty challenging for the Mosasaurus to grab its prey in the water. That's why it had all these teeth, plus something special: pterygoid teeth anchored to the bones on the roof of its mouth. This made hunting and holding onto its prey much easier. The Styxosaurus belonged to the plesiosaur family and lived during the late Cretaceous period, around 85 to 70 million years ago. Upon first glance at this dinosaur, you might mistake it for a sea snake, and it'd be an honest mistake. Styxosauruses were about 35 feet in length, but over 16 feet of that consisted just of their long snake-like neck. They had a comparatively small body and weighed approximately 4 tons. Their mouths were full of razor-sharp cone-shaped teeth that they used to catch fish. They didn't need to chew their prey, thanks to the 200 small stones called gastroliths in their bellies that probably aided in digestion. At the same time, some scientists believe that the Styxosaurus used these stones to sink to the ocean bottom in search of particular types of fish. Looks kind of like Nessie to me.
In the past 30 years, scientists have made an incredible discovery of a new creature living deep beneath the surface of the ocean. And the name of the creature is the harp sponge. Now, if you're wondering why it took so long to come across this animal, then I might have the answer. These creatures typically hang out at a depth of roughly 11,100 feet beneath the ocean's waves. This sponge species was first discovered off the coast of California thanks to a robot that was sturdy enough to explore those crazy depths the ocean has to offer. This is no doubt an area of the planet where even the most benign-looking creatures can be potentially dangerous. But even scientists were surprised to find that this creature was more than just a sponge. Now, this might seem obvious, but the harp sponge got its name because its basic structure, referred to as a vein, is the same shape as a harp. Each vein is made up of a horizontal branch supporting several parallel vertical branches. But don't let the harp sponge's fanciful and amusing appearance or its non-intimidating name fool you. Yeah, the harp sponge is very much a deep-sea hunter. It has a unique ability to capture and envelop small animals using its rhizoids, short, thin fibers. With their help, the harp sponge clings on to the soft, muddy bottom and catches tiny creatures that get swept into its branches by deep-sea currents. Uh-oh. Other sponge creatures often feed by pulling bacteria and bits of organic matter from the seawater and filtering them through their bodies. But not our harp sponge. Instead, it snatches its future meal with minuscule barbed hooks that cover each of the harp sponge's branches. Now, harp sponges prefer tiny crustaceans like crabs, crayfish, shrimps, and prawns. Once the harp sponge has one of them in its clutches, it envelops the animal in a thin membrane before slowly beginning to digest it. So, pal, what's eating you? Oh, Harpo? Too bad. Researchers believe that harp sponges use this method of feeding because there aren't enough nutrients that deep down. This makes traditional filter feeding less effective. Research has shown that the creature is still in the process of evolving. Early harp sponges, researchers found, only had 2 veins, but later, scientists discovered other harp sponges that had 6 veins. The harp sponge might have evolved this elaborate candle holder-like structure to increase its surface area. In general, harp sponges typically grow up to a length of 1 foot, but researchers have seen a creature that was 2 feet in length. The harp sponge is not only very unusual, but also beautiful to look at. See those tiny white balls on top of the branches? Now, why don't we look at some other creatures that live below the photic zone of Earth's oceans? The photic zone means the area beneath the ocean's surface that still receives some sunlight. Thanks to this, there are loads of different creatures and organisms living there. Any animal living beyond this layer qualifies as a deep-sea creature. The Tomopterus worm is a segmented worm you can find in the twilight zone of the ocean. This is the area that lies between 650 and 3,300 feet beneath the surface. These creatures are often no more than 1 inch long, but the largest of them can grow up to 1 foot. While swimming around and feeding, these worms do what researchers describe as an amazing smooth dance. That's because the creatures can swim extremely quickly and maneuver at tight angles with ease. Now, I know most people hear the word worm and think of the common earthworm, so it's quite interesting to know there's a deep-sea worm out there that never leaves the water during its entire life. Similarly, most of us try to avoid jellyfish that either rest on the sand or sit on top of the ocean waves. This isn't the case with a Chrysota jelly. That's a deep-sea creature too. This beautiful jellyfish is mostly ruby red, bright orange, or electric purple. That's what helped researchers realize they had found a new species of jellyfish. The creature grows to a maximum size of 1 inch across. It has tentacles that stretch out in every direction. Now, if you come close to this jellyfish, it'll pull all these tentacles in toward its body before rapidly swimming away to avoid danger. Yes, you are dangerous. The cresota jelly is extremely rare. You won't see it very often. You might need to borrow that deep-sea diving robot I mentioned earlier. While worms and jellyfish might seem quite harmless, this isn't the case with the Pacific viperfish. Ooh. This creature is equipped with a noticeably big mouth, like me, and the needle-like teeth inside are key to its hunting strategy. Pacific viperfish live at around 5,000 feet below the ocean surface, but they're among those numerous marine animals that migrate each night from the ocean depths toward shallower waters to dine. What's on the menu for dinner tonight? Lots of small fish and shrimp. The creature can grow up to 12 inches in length. Its two front fangs, which stick up from the fish's bottom jaw past its own eyes, are especially dramatic. When the fish unhinges its jaw, its mouth can open wide enough to engulf smaller animals, and the teeth form a cage to prevent an escape. Now, have you ever seen an underwater creature that looks like a strawberry? Trust me, it does exist. Just look at these dots on the strawberry squid. The creature has a big eye and a smaller one. You might think this unconventional pairing would be awkward and uncomfortable, but it's actually the opposite. The big left eye looks upward. It spots shadows cast by other animals in the dimly lit waters above. The eye's tubular shape helps it collect as much light as possible. On the other side of the squid's head, you can see its right eye. It's small and looks downward. This eye searches for flashes of bioluminescence produced by animals lurking in the darker waters below. Now, bioluminescence means the production and emission of light by living organisms. By the way, the squid has a nickname. And no, it's not Squiggy, although that's a great one. It's known as the cockeyed squid. This is simply due to the remarkable difference in size between its two eyes. I think I like Squiggy better, and so it goes. Since light doesn't reach the deep sea, the strawberry squid's body actually looks black. This helps the creature hide from enemies, such as sharks and dolphins. In general, the strawberry squid grows to a length of 5 inches. It typically lives around 3,000 feet below the surface, but floats to shallower waters at night. Now, the feather star is a marine creature without a backbone, but with feather-like arms that radiate from the center of its body. These creatures first appeared around 200 million years ago. Related to sea stars, they look like a flower, but if you approach them, they'll quickly swim away. But not all feather stars can swim. Many species can only crawl along the bottom of the seafloor. Like some of the other deep-sea creatures we've looked at, the feather star can adapt to its surroundings. It has a creepy ability to shed its arms, the same way some lizards can shed their tails. This also helps them escape from their enemies. Feather stars live all across the globe, from the equator to the poles, from the shallow waters on top of reefs to the deep, deep sea. Now, given that we're dealing with mysterious creatures, the name of this one is quite fitting. The swift vampire squid should be the official symbol of life in the deep sea. The animal has a dark red body, huge blue eyes, and a cloak-like web that stretches between its 8 arms. This, along with its name, may suggest that the creature is some form of a terrifying hunter. In reality, though, the vampire squid is a soft-bodied, timid creature, about the size, shape, and color of a football. It grows to roughly 12 inches in length and lives 3,000 feet below the waves. There's almost no oxygen there, but also relatively few predators. Whew, I think I'll need to decompress from this one.
Imagine descending to the depth of the ocean. It's getting darker and darker. And suddenly, you see something shocking. The remains of a mysterious creature. You've never seen anything like that before. It actually happened in 2017. An oil and gas industry worker filmed a video and sent it to researcher Deborah Hadswell. Ultimately, the video ended up on the internet. It was recorded at a depth of about 2,700 feet during an investigation conducted by a remote-operated vehicle. At one point during the examination, the submarine came across the remains measuring almost 98 feet in length. The operator of the submarine was startled by the unexpected discovery. He tried to use the submarine's remote-controlled claws to get a hold of a piece of the skeleton. But once the claws touched the remains, they immediately crumbled into dust. Some people are sure that the skeleton must have belonged to a whale, but Hatswell has her own idea. She claims that since the video was taken by a professional, he should know what whale bones look like. Those who work underwater occasionally come across such remains. She also adds that a whale's spine has 3 blades spaced 120 degrees apart, but the discovered creature had only 2. Plus, the dimensions of the remains don't fit any sea life in that region. So, is it a representative of some previously unknown giant marine species or just a regular whale? It remains unclear. According to scientists, there are several reasons why marine animals can grow incredibly massive. First of all, they live in the ocean, which means their playground is big enough. They aren't limited by any borders and thus can grow and develop. Besides, you might remember how weightless you feel when floating in the water. Marine giants experience the same. Unfortunately, unlike you, they can't rely on its skeleton. I mean, their bodies wouldn't be strong enough to support such a huge body on dry land. But in the ocean, the buoyancy of the water helps them stay afloat. That's why they can grow as massive as they want. The largest living animal on Earth is the blue whale. The average grown-up animal reaches up to 98 feet in length and weighs like 33 elephants. The blue whale's heart can be compared to a small golf cart, and the volume of this magnificent creature is almost the same as the volume of 7 fuel trucks. And if you think that at birth, blue whales are just as huge, you're absolutely right. When a baby whale gets born, it's already bigger than a hippo. At a length of almost 25 feet, this kid sometimes weighs more than an elephant, about 3 tons. A little whale drinks 50 gallons of mom's milk every day. As a result, it gains about 200 pounds of weight every day. But this is nothing in comparison to how much adult blue whales eat. They devour 4 tons of food a day. That's approximately 40 million krill. These tiny shrimp-like creatures are the main food source for blue whales. Now, how about we talk about other giant and unusual animals? These days, the capybara is considered to be the largest rodent in the world. It can grow up to 130 pounds. But around 3 million years ago, there was another rodent that was way larger than the capybara. It weighed a whopping 2,600 pounds. Let's call this creature J. monesi, since its full name is too tricky to pronounce. They lived in the forest areas of modern-day Uruguay. These animals had big front teeth. Scientists think they could use them in the same way elephants use their tusks, for getting food and defending themselves from predators. As for the animal's molars, they were small and too weak to chew tough food. At the same time, the J. monesi had a strong bite, 3 times more powerful than that of a tiger. More than 30 million years ago, a hornless rhino was roaming Earth. This giant weighed more than 4 grown-up modern elephants, about 30 tons. Even though it reached a height of 18 feet, the animal had a small skull. But its long limbs allowed it to eat branches and leaves off pretty tall trees. Even without the horns modern-day rhinos can boast, their prehistoric relatives had something unusual. It was teeth. Out of 2 pairs of incisors, the lower one pointed forward and the upper one leaned downward. Experts think this could help the creature hold branches in its mouth more steadily while eating them. This prehistoric rhino is still the largest known land mammal to ever exist. The Argentinosaurus is considered to be one of the largest dinosaurs to have ever roamed the surface of the planet. This creature was discovered in 1987 in Argentina, hence the name. The length of this colossal herbivore that lived around 90 to 100 million years ago could be as long as 3 school buses. These dinos were pretty slow. Their top speed was around 5 miles per hour, which is the speed of a very slow taxiing Boeing 747. But no wonder they didn't rush. Imagine carrying such a huge weight every day. Scientists haven't figured out yet how these enormous animals held their necks vertically or horizontally. The problem is that in a vertical position, the Argentinosaurus's heart would have experienced enormous pressure. After all, it would have had to pump an impressive amount of blood, 40 feet into the air, and repeat it 60 times every minute. The green anaconda is one of the largest snakes on the planet, considering its length to weight ratio. The average specimen might not be the world's longest, but the snake's enormous girth makes it twice as heavy as other huge reptiles. This creature is rather clumsy on land, but sleek and fast in the water. It can also lay in wait for hours while almost totally submerged. The saltwater crocodile can grow up to 23 feet in length. It's the most massive modern reptile. The largest males can weigh as much as a small hippo. Females are usually twice smaller. These super predators have the most powerful bite among reptiles. They hunt by hiding near rivers and waiting for animals to come to drink water. They also don't hesitate to strike people. The largest living organism on dry land might be a particular honey fungus which grows in the Blue Mountains in Oregon. It spreads over an area equal to 1,700 soccer fields, and although it may sound incredible, the fungus can be from 2,400 to 8,650 years old. The only part of this huge thing you can accidentally spot is small brownish mushrooms on the ground. But even if you take a usual mushroom, what you see is only 10% of the whole deal. The biggest part is hidden from your eyes underground. But while ordinary mushrooms feed on plants and fallen leaves, the honey fungus is much more dangerous. It's very harmful to the trees growing nearby. The fungus attaches itself to tree roots and feeds off of them. Unfortunately, this process damages trees, slowly and irreversibly. And if you have doubts about whether this fungus colony can be considered an individual organism, don't worry, it passes the test. It perfectly fits the definition because the fungus consists of genetically identical cells which communicate, coordinate themselves, and share a common purpose. According to rough estimates, the weight of the Oregonian humongous fungus may reach 441 tons. That's much heavier than the blue whale. But even if some animal isn't the largest in the world, it doesn't mean it can't surprise you. For example, a 1-inch long subtropical shrimp disorients its prey with a sonic boom. As loud as a sonic boom once produced by the supersonic plane Concorde. This sound stuns the prey, and the shrimp can catch it without too much effort.
The stonefish. Stonefish aren't going to win any beauty contests, unless the pageant is for best rock look-alike. Their tiny unreflective eyes and rough skin blend in perfectly with their environment. A large head, an even bigger mouth, and a home full of, it's rocks. And just because you're on the beach doesn't mean you're safe. Stonefish can survive for 24 hours out of the water. Stepping on one or even handling one won't be that fun. Their dorsal fin spines have extremely strong venom. It shoots out when they get stepped on, and it can lead to paralysis or even heart failure. You'll need help fast. No wonder they're one of the most dangerous creatures in the water, or anywhere. Be careful when scrambling around rocky areas. They love to play hide and seek. The deep-sea dragonfish. If there were a prize for the most hideous fish in the ocean, the deep-sea dragonfish would win. With slimy, scaleless skin, massive teeth, and a face only a mother could love, this bad boy of the sea is nothing to mess with. It likes to swim between 700 feet and 6,000 feet below the surface of the ocean, where the waters are the darkest and coldest. Along with some other creatures on this list, the deep-sea dragonfish relies on its bioluminescent body parts to catch prey. It also uses its hanging appendage, which boasts a little red light on the end, coming out from its lower jaw. Many fish mistake this little light for prey. luring them right into the jaws of the deep-sea dragonfish. Very clever dragonfish. Very clever indeed. The fangtooth. The Mariana Trench is an underwater trench with a depth of 35,000 feet, nearly 7 miles below the ocean surface. Let that sink in. While scientists know the Mariana Trench exists, it's one of the least explored places on Earth. It's also the deepest area of Earth's oceans. And although many creatures down there probably haven't even been seen by humans yet, scientists have had the creepy pleasure of getting to know the fangtooth. The fangtooth fish shamelessly lives up to its name. Just look at that thing. The fangtooth is carnivorous and feeds on just about anything it can find that gets caught in its sharp-toothed mouth. These fish rely on their contact chemoreception to find prey. In other words, they can sense chemical residue that comes off of other living organisms in the deep sea. This is because they don't have any light-producing cells on their bodies, unlike many other deep-sea fish. On top of all that, it's pretty dark down there, so whatever crosses their path, they chomp on. While these guys look pretty scary, they're not a threat to humans. They only grow about 7 inches long. Even so, I wouldn't want to run into one of these things during a relaxing swim in the ocean. The Dunkleosteus. Strangely enough, this prehistoric fish, known as the T-Rex of the seas, had no teeth. Those were replaced with bony plates that allowed it to have the strongest bite among other monsters of its size. The goblin shark. If you thought the movies about sharks were scary, this next deep-sea creature will make you swear off going for dips in the ocean forever. However, it lives 3,000 feet underwater, so you'll never likely see it face to face. The goblin shark looks like a cross between a shark and a creature from your worst nightmare. These sharks boast a protruding sword-like snout with a jaw that juts out to match. Unlike other sharks that have more of a gray hue, this creepy thing looks not so pretty and pink. Aside from their scary demeanor, what do scientists really know about the goblin shark? Well, not much, except that they can grow up to 18 feet in length. Looks like there's still a lot to learn about these guys, if you dare to. By the way, did you know that sharks don't sleep? Many species have to keep water moving over their gills to get oxygen, so they can't fall into a deep sleep like we do. That's why they stay half awake during rest. Typically, sharks don't even close their eyes. The cookie cutter shark. This shark is a living horror, with lower teeth being big and sharp, while the upper ones are much smaller. When its teeth fall off, the shark eats them to maintain calcium levels. Pretty smart solution for a shark. The frilled shark. Studying the frilled shark is like looking through a portal back to prehistoric times. That's because scientists think that these eel-like sharks haven't changed much since their oldest ancestors roamed the deep sea waters, so they're sometimes referred to as living fossils. These sharks' mouths are filled with a terrifying 25 rows of backward-facing sharp teeth, 300 in total. They're designed to grasp prey and hold them tight so they can't get away, according to early studies of the shark conducted in 1884 and published in the Bulletin of the Essex Institute. Luckily for swimmers, the frilled sharks live between 390 feet and 4,200 feet below the ocean's surface, so they'll probably never run into them. Probably. This is probably the worst nightmare of any dentist. The northern stargazer. Take a look at this cutie. The northern stargazer is definitely not something you'd wish to see on the ocean floor. This horrid creature hides its body under the sand, leaving its face above to wait for prey. The tasseled wobbegong. Here's another carpet shark on our list. It lies low on the bottom of the sea and patiently waits for its prey to come by. The Australian ghost shark. The Australian ghost shark isn't really even a shark, but a very bony fish. It's also a living fossil. It hasn't changed within the last 400 million years. Believe it or not, sharks and humans have a common ancestor that lived around 440 million years ago. Even though we both evolved in our own way, there are still some signs of that connection. For example, the genome of an elephant shark is very similar to humans. The Leopleurodon. This list of terrifying creatures would be incomplete without mentioning the terrifying and prehistoric Leopleurodon. This carnivorous marine reptile existed during the Colovian stage of the Middle Jurassic era and ruled the waters at 9 feet in length. Scientists believe Leopleurodon thrived in this deep-sea trench because of its ability to swim long distances and its 4 paddle-like limbs. While they probably weren't able to propel themselves toward prey like other animals of the area, they did manage to accelerate and attack very ruthlessly and efficiently. Additionally, they relied on their long snouts to smell prey, which leads scientists to believe they didn't rely on sight for hunting. This means they could have thrived in the dark Mariana Trench. Around 150 million years ago, Leopleurodon became extinct due to competition for prey against other thriving marine reptiles. And I think I speak for all of us when I say, thank goodness for that. Considering that scientists have only explored 5% of the ocean floor and found some of the scariest sea creatures imaginable, one can only dream of what other animals reside in the deep sea waters. Perhaps it's best to keep them in your imagination. Am I right? The megamouth shark. This shark is a filter feeder, and it's friendly to humans, although its huge mouth can look quite threatening. Like basking sharks, it swims with its mouth constantly wide open, as if it were on Twitter. The gulper eel. This deep-sea eel has an easily distended belly that allows it to swallow prey twice its size in a single monstrous bite. They have very unusual jaw shapes and can reach about 2 to 3 feet in length. Do you see that large log near the ocean floor? Maybe it's part of an old ship. Treasure, gold, diamonds, I'm rich! Well, as you get closer, you notice something. It's swimming! It's not a shark or a dolphin, it's a saltwater crocodile! Now don't panic. If you bump into one of these reptiles in the sea, it's unlikely it'll think of you as food. Crocodiles have a special valve in their throat that stops them from drowning underwater, but that doesn't mean they can't bite. Usually, they're heading to a nearby island, and the quickest way there is to body surf. They can't really take the ferry, you know. Watching one from a distance should be okay. Just don't swim to shore right away. They love to ambush their lunch in shallow water. If there's one time I'd want to see a great white shark, it's when I'm diving with crocodiles. They'll gladly take a crocodile-sized nibble, given the